We have a quorum, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Albany Transportation Commission for Thursday, June 26th, 2025. We'll start with the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lijon. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Barnes.
Present.
Commissioner Hiley.
Present.
Commissioner Kerr.
Present.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Present.
Chair Javanda.
Present.
And Commissioner Baldwin and Commissioner Zuba have notified us that they won't be able to attend.
Very good. Okay, that takes us to public comment. This is for people who'd like to address the commission on anything not on tonight's agenda. Do we have any hands raised online? Or anyone here?
If you wish to speak on an item not on the agenda, please use the raise your hand feature. Not seeing any.
Very good. That takes us to item 3, which is the consent calendar. That includes the minutes of the April 24th meeting and the monthly police data on collisions and citations. Does anyone wish to pull one of these for discussion?
I need to pull the minutes for a minor correction.
Very good. Any other items? Okay. No members of the public wish to pull any items, it appears. So please, go ahead.
As the minutes are written, there's a recorded unanimous vote on the item. Let's see if I can find my notes on this.
Is that the sugar sweetened beverage tax item?
Yeah, I just have some notes that I'm looking for. So, the sugar sweetened beverage tax was listed as a unanimous approval, and I actually did vote no, and a couple of my fellow commissioners asked me about that, so I thought it was appropriate to correct that in the record. Other than that, I have no comment.
Thank you. Do we have any other corrections? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as corrected?
So moved.
Second?
And I'll second.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yes.
Commissioner Hiley.
Aye.
Commissioner Kerr.
Yes.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Yes.
Chair Javanda.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item 4-1, the Active Transportation Plan Phase 2 Future Networks. And the consultant for the city will provide an update on the plan development and present draft active transportation networks. And the action before us would be to consider a recommendation to the City Council on approving the draft active transportation networks, inclusive of changes recommended by the Commission tonight if we make any. Okay, staff?
I'm just going to tee up the consultants before they get started on the presentation. So welcome, we're in phase 2 of the City of Albany's Active Transportation Plan. Tonight we are going to go through a few things together. Next slide, please. We're going to recap where we've been thus far in this wonderful journey. We're going to review the draft bicycle and pedestrian networks. We're going to go over kind of the stakeholder engagement process during phase 2 and specifically the feedback that was provided by stakeholders in the public. Then we're going to kind of talk about, get into the meat of a couple of corridor designs that we're seeking the Commission's feedback on. And then we're going to go over next steps. So just starting us off with a recap of recent activities. So as noted, we are in phase 2 of a 3-phase active transportation plan process. This was really the network development phase. Next slide, please. So a quick kind of review of where we've been in the past few months. We brought to City Council on February 18th the existing conditions, which City Council approved and kind of launched us into phase 2. So that was the end of phase 1, and now we're in phase 2. We then developed an initial draft of the active transportation networks, both the bicycle and the pedestrian networks, based on feedback that we heard in phase 1. And then we conducted public outreach and with the technical advisory committee first, where we sought their feedback on the networks, and then with the public, including many of you, at our meeting in late May, but also had an online feedback opportunity that was open for 3 weeks that we'll talk about in more detail later on in this presentation. And we also brought Solano Avenue. We did analysis and conceptual design for Solano Avenue, and then we brought it to City Council for a briefing on May 5th. And we'll talk a little bit more about Solano Avenue in this presentation and kind of where we'll be going with that piece of the puzzle. So without further ado, I will present Pete Rusitti from Parametrics, one of our consultants.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Is this working? You guys can hear me? Okay. My name is Pete Rusitti. I am from Parametrics. It's good to see many of you again. Good to be back. And as Ben said, we're now in phase 2. I'm going to cover a little bit about our approach to how we develop the networks and kind of what that means. And then I'm going to turn over to Angie Chen from Fair and Peers, who is our sub-consultant, to discuss kind of some of the nuts and bolts of the network. And then she'll turn it back over to me. I'll go over what we heard from the stakeholders and some of those kind of more specific design questions and corridor questions that we wanted to review with this body. For those of you who had took a look at the packet and the memo, we tried to keep the memo short and not get deep in the weeds and kind of try to summarize at a high level. This presentation does get a little bit deeper in the weeds. We tried to break things down a little bit more, and especially as we get toward the end and we discuss the specific corridors. There are some slides that are very busy that has a lot of info, and so I think this is a perfect setting for it, and this is the item on the agenda, so we're really happy to discuss. So if we can do next slide. So when we were last here, we had done the existing conditions analysis, and we got a lot of comments, and we met with the agency stakeholders and the community. So we had a lot of sources to draw from to develop the networks. And what you can see, the bullets right here are many of the sources that we used. And in fact, actually one of the ones that's not listed is the city already has a very strong active transportation plan, and it was done in 2012, and then it's been updated a few times. And that was also one of the things that we based this on. That plan really did a good job of kind of defining the bones of the networks and defining connectivity in the city. And so our goal is to try to build on that, to try to plug some of those gaps and update some of the facilities to the state of the practice, which there's a lot of new guidance since 2012. In addition to that, we, at the beginning of this process, we did all those things that are listed there. We set goals that we went through with this group. We looked at existing conditions, needs, and opportunities. We examined network connectivity in terms of where do people need to go. Do the networks cover everywhere in the city and connect people to where they need to be? Like we said, the 2012 ATP did a pretty good job of that. A lot of review with the stakeholders, as we mentioned. There's also really good policy guidance from the City of Albany through its general plan and lots of other planning documents, but also Alameda CTC and MTC have a lot of guidance on doing active transportation planning and design, and they really try to make it as easy as possible for the cities, so we were able to lean on that guidance a lot, and also Caltrans as well. And like I mentioned, a lot of the best practices have evolved, and there's some new guidance on the street that we can use to help us make some of the tougher choices. So, with all that, we developed some draft networks. We're going to go over them tonight. We've already taken those through the stakeholder process kind of partially. You are one of our last stops, but not the last stop. So we had initial draft networks. We brought them to the stakeholders, to the community, to what we call the TAC, which is the agency stakeholders, the neighboring cities and all those folks, and took their input, and we've made a couple tweaks, and Angie's going to go over that. But what we're going to show you tonight is really the networks that were done in draft form, and then we refined them a little bit based on what we heard. And for the things that we as a project team had consensus on, we went ahead and made those tweaks. And for the most part, it was all additive, so we kind of added things to the network. And then, again, some of the finer points, some of the issues that are a little bit trickier, we want to bring to this body and discuss. Also, a lot of the comments that we received were directed at specific projects and specific locations, saying, oh, at this corner, I'd love to see this here, or on this lane, we need bike lanes here. And those are really good comments, but if they're directed at specific facility types, we mostly flag those and are really going to be looking at those more in the next phase. Once we've got kind of the bones of the network set, like all the essentially lines on the map, then we want to dive into corridors and say, well, okay, what actually fits here, and what are our standards for defining what the specific facility type will be. So a lot of those comments we received, we're going to flag for future work looking at specific corridors, and we'll go over all of that. And so the next step in that outreach tour is to review the networks with this body, and then probably get a little more feedback. We've been doing ongoing conversations with the TAC and the schools and everything, but ultimately to take them to the City Council and get their blessing before we move into the third phase. Next slide. I think I said more than I was intending to on that slide, but I felt like I needed to kind of explain the big picture a little bit. So when we did look at the network development, these were some of the focus areas that we really wanted to focus on, looking at the current active transportation plan and trying to, again, take it to the next level. So we want to improve the comfort level, and comfort's a word that you're going to hear a lot. It's really a great way for us to measure the experience for biking and rolling, and pedestrians and walking. And specifically, we heard a lot of comments on the north-south streets, specifically the bike boulevards, some of those streets that we try to direct bikers to instead of streets like San Pablo. The east-west connections, so obviously north, south, east, west covers a lot. The school zones, especially the kind of conflicts between the pickup drop-off with all the vehicles and then all the students trying to get there on bikes and walking. A lot of the major roadways, certainly there's a lot of conflict points, intersections especially. One thing that we really found was that the initial active transportation plan, not just in this city, but kind of all over, we've been doing this for about 15 years. In the beginning, we really focused a lot on segments, on lines, and on corridors, saying, okay, we want to put bike lanes here, and that's great. And in a lot of places, we went ahead and did that. But the intersections are really where a lot of the conflict points remain, and they happen to be the most challenging too. And so what we really heard was, hey, the city's done a great job in kind of getting some of the lines down, but we still have to cross this street, and there's no way for me to cross it, even though the street is otherwise really good. But when I get to this intersection, the cross traffic doesn't stop, and what am I supposed to do? So we heard a lot of comments like that. And then, of course, Solano Avenue. And you're probably aware that we have a separate task going right now to look at some of the design options, and we've already been to council, as Ben mentioned. The other factor that we wanted to address was, again, the specific things that we heard from the community about where are there specific gaps or places, and we've flagged a lot of those. And then as we have a master comment database, and as we start looking at, okay, we're going to say, okay, let's look at San Pablo and Buchanan, what are we going to do there? Then everything's mapped, and we can zoom in and look at every single comment we got there, so we can kind of look at it at a location-specific way. What we're going to talk about here is kind of more of the broader themes. Okay, next slide. I gotta keep moving here. We, again, put in the memo that tried to keep it really simple and not get deep in the weeds. We want to walk through a little bit how the networks are structured here, and I'm going to turn over to Angie to do that, but really kind of break it down a little bit more in terms of what it means and what those maps mean that were in your packet. So without further ado, thanks, Angie.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Hi, I'm Angie Chan from Van Pierce. I'll be walking through the draft networks. So just the overall approach, we have our active transportation network, which is broken into our pedestrian and walking network, as well as our biking and rolling network. Next slide. So we developed this concept of nested networks for the ATP, and that helps us understand where to prioritize each mode. So for on the left-hand side, the pedestrian and walking network, the full network consists of all sidewalks, paths, and trails citywide, right? Pedestrians can walk anywhere where there is a sidewalk or a path, and that is the full mobility network for pedestrians. Now, within that, we have our high comfort walking network, and this is where we have the highest levels of priority and treatment for people walking, and where we want to see the highest comfort for people who are walking. We want to make sure that it's really, really safe and comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. On the right-hand side, we have the same kind of concept for biking and rolling. You'll notice that there's a designated biking and rolling network, but no equivalent for the pedestrians, and that's, of course, because streets in Albany generally have sidewalks built out. Of course, there are issues with sidewalk obstructions, as well as places where the sidewalk width is not super ideal, but generally, you can walk anywhere where there is a street in Albany. Whereas that's not the case for biking. Not every street in Albany has designated facilities. Not every street is a bike route or a bike lane. And so that's where that comes in, where the designated network is everywhere where there is a marked bike facility on the street. Now, within the designated network, there's a priority or the high comfort biking and rolling network, and this is where we want to get to the high comfort standard, all ages and abilities, which I'll talk about in the next few slides. Next slide. Again, keep going. So I know this body has talked about the concept of high comfort with the level of bicycle stress and recognizing that the high comfort is kind of a subjective definition where some streets can be comfortable for some and not for others. But generally, there are treatments and standards that we can look to increase comfort for people walking. And so we'll go over some of these treatments today. This is not an extensive list, but what we really want to focus on here, like Pete said, is this focus on crossings and conflict points and getting to level of comfort at intersections, really separating out pedestrians from potential conflicts with vehicles at these conflict points. And so that can look like a curb extension, which reduces the crossing width for pedestrians, as well as some treatments to improve visibility, such as an RFB or a high visibility crosswalk to increase visibility for drivers, as well as median refuge islands to allow for pedestrians to have a safe place to wait as they cross opposing lanes of travel. There are also potential additional considerations that go into high comfort. Again, this is kind of more qualitative things like sidewalk width, landscaping, lighting, other amenities that just make an overall attractive and comfortable pedestrian environment. Next slide. Now for biking, there is a standard for high comfort that is defined by NACDO, all ages and abilities, and we would want to look to meet that or exceed that. So this is the new Urban Bikeway Design Guide, the new edition of it, which has this table for selecting all ages and abilities bikeways. And I believe this commission has gone through some of this, but I'll just walk through it again. It's dependent on target motor vehicle speed as well as motor vehicle volume, both per day and also peak hour and peak direction. And so you'll notice here on the top row that a protected bike lane is really acceptable and an all ages and abilities facility for streets with any vehicle speed and any vehicle volume. And so that is a facility that we can consider not just on our busiest streets, but on any street. But we also have other options. We can have shared spaces, which is really targeted towards very, very low volume, very low speed streets, as well as bicycle boulevards, which is a little bit higher than that. And then we have, advisory bike lanes, constrained bike lanes, as well as buffered bike lanes, which are acceptable for volumes that are kind of under 3,000 for bike lanes, 6,000 for buffered bike lanes, as well as keeping speeds under 20 to 25. We conducted traffic counts for this. The city does annual traffic counts, and so we have a couple of new counts that informed our network development process. And what we are seeing here is that volumes are generally low on a lot of these corridors. There's still improvements that can happen with traffic calming and traffic diversion, but the speeds are generally a little bit higher than we would want to see on a lot of these corridors, higher than 25 miles an hour. But we can get into that specific stuff later. So again, this is the all ages and abilities standard that NACDO has put forth and Alameda CTC has adopted through their countywide bikeways network. Next slide. So now going into the draft pedestrian and walking network. Okay, I want to make sure that you all can see that. I'll just walk through this map really quick. This is the pedestrian priority network in green, as well as the pedestrian priority intersections that are highlighted in orange on the map. And so this really shows where we want to get to a high level of comfort on Albany streets. This is based off and builds off of the last ATP. And what we did here is that we added these pedestrian priority connections, which were based on a couple of factors, including demand, connectivity, as well as collision history. So looking at places places where intersections are close to schools or close to parks and other recreational destinations, commercial destinations, and then looking at the last 10 years of collision history and looking at whether there's been a fatal or severe injury or another injury collision at that intersection. Based on feedback from phase 2 of engagement, we added quite a few priority intersections to change it from kind of this green dot to the orange dot. And this was based on feedback that we got for a couple of these intersections, really noting that there are issues at these intersections and people wanted to see them prioritized. And so what we did here was kind of a blanket, any intersection that's at the intersection of 2 network corridors is automatically a priority intersection, kind of looking at it's a proxy for pedestrian demand, assuming that, these priority corridors are going to see higher demand, and so the intersections of those 2 corridors would also see higher demand. Next slide. Now going into the draft biking and rolling network, this is also a place where we made some changes based on stakeholder feedback, which Pete will also go over when I hand it back to him. But walking through this map, we have our proposed high comfort network in green, and then our bicycle network in blue and dark green. The blue signifies on-street bikeways. This is your bike lanes, your bike routes, and bike boulevards that are on the street, whereas the dark green is your shared use paths. And so what we've shown here, the dotted lines are places where we're proposing additions to the previously adopted biking and rolling network from the last ATP and adding new connections to really facilitate travel throughout Albany. And so that includes a new connection on Curtis Street, which Pete will talk about and we'll get more in depth in the corridor discussion, as well as connections to El Cerrito to the north and Berkeley to the south with these alignments for potential connections, which is something that we heard from our TAC. New connections in UC Village, as well as connecting Brighton across San Pablo, Adams to Buchanan, and then a new connection west of the freeway next to Golden Gate Fields. So that's just a broad overview of the changes that we've made from the last ATP. In addition to the lines on the map, we also have dots on the map. These are our signalized and unsignalized bicycle priority intersections. And what we really looked at here was all signalized intersections are considered priority intersections. And then we looked at places where it's unsignalized and bicycles have to wait for traffic to stop, so cross traffic does not stop. And this is where we heard a lot of feedback, especially on our north-south corridors like Keynes and Adams, where it's really difficult to cross, big, there's a lot of cars and it's just really difficult to wait for a gap in traffic, and that causes some safety issues. And that's something that we've heard again and again from engagements. So we've noted those on the map as places to potentially have intersection improvements as well. Next slide. Okay, I'll bring it back to Pete.
Thank you, Angie. One of the things that we hope is kind of coming through here is that instead of prescribing specific facilities at this stage of the plan, we really want to identify what our goals are in terms of what is the experience that we want. And so high comfort could look different on different streets depending on the width of the street, the volume, and for PEDs especially, Angie mentioned there's some different features that a high comfort pedestrian street might have, and it depends on what that street is. If it's a commercial street like Solano, it might be wider sidewalks and street furniture and trees. But if it's a different type of PED priority, like leading to a park or a school, it might have something different. And so, again, looking more at the kind of the outcome and the experience that we want to create, rather than prescribing a specific facility before we've had a chance to really do the design or anything. And we think that's the right direction for a plan at this level to really focus on goals and outcomes, as opposed to prescribing specific facilities, which then when you try to implement them later, you may run into various issues that kind of come out through the design. So next slide, please. We're going to talk about what we heard from the stakeholders. And again, I think we kind of covered this. I talked a lot on my first slides, and I probably should have waited for this. But we've got the draft networks reviewed by the TAC. That actually lists who the TAC members are there. Departments within the city. There are neighbor jurisdictions, and then quite a few regional agencies and other partner agencies that I'm sure everybody knows very well. And then, as we mentioned, we did an in-person meeting called our Planning Expo, which was about this project, but also a couple other ones on May 22nd, and then a 3-week online comment period. Okay, next slide. This is a heat map that shows kind of where the comments were focused that we got from this phase. The call-outs there is just to identify a couple spots on the map, not that there's anything necessarily in particular about them that we want to necessarily speak about tonight, but just to help you orient yourself to the map and where some of those hot spots were. We definitely heard, again, the themes that we've been saying here: network gaps, crosswalks especially, sidewalk quality, and so, certain things like that, like sidewalk quality, we want to, ensure that the ATP has a policy that calls for a state of good repair, but also that we take those comments that we heard and we pass them on to Public Works so that those can actually be dealt with, because things like that are a little bit outside the purview of the active transportation plan, except at kind of the more policy level. School zones, traffic calming for sure, and lighting. Next slide goes over what we heard for the biking and rolling comments. Again, you can see on the heat map some of those key areas. Yeah, sorry, I was just looking at the thing that said Buchanan and Marin. That's also at San Pablo right there. But anyway, things we heard there was network gaps, especially trying to either go along a busy street like a San Pablo or trying to cross it. Bike infrastructure, again, trying to kind of, where there might be a striped lane or something, maybe hoping to upgrade that. Intersections for sure, and the need for traffic calming on all streets, but especially those shared streets, the ones that we're denoting as shared use, bike boulevard, or things like that. Next slide. And so we, again, Angie kind of walked through this. We assessed the feedback. We added some segments. We added some intersections. The comments were largely additive, which is a good thing. I think we didn't really hear anybody say, oh, you got to take that out. Usually most of the comments are additive. What that does do is that kind of, in the end, this is going to create more improvements and more projects for the city. Because every time we add a dot, that means that, we probably want to have a project there that, that contains a certain amount of improvements. And so then that kind of kicks the can down the road a little bit, because then it becomes an issue of trying to prioritize these things. If we just add more projects, it becomes kind of a wish list, and then we actually have to implement them. So the third phase also, we want to pull out the highest priority projects and try to define those a little more completely, design concepts and costs and everything, so that we can get them right into the city's CIP. And then again, like I mentioned before, we got a lot of location-specific and facility-specific comments. We flagged all those, and they're in a mapped database like you saw, so when it comes time to look at a specific facility, we can draw a line around them and look at every single comment we got about that. Okay, next slide. And then these are the items for further discussion that we wanted to go over, and there's 4 of them. This isn't to say that every other issue in the city is solved. Like I said, as we go into the next phase, we're going to look at some project-specific decisions. But here's some items about the network that we wanted to tee up now and really get your take on these. And for some of them, we have, I guess for all of them, we have a recommendation. But again, this is kind of intended to be a discussion, and we want to get your input on these things also. So if we can go to the next slide. The first one is Solano. It's really more of an information item. The key question that we're trying to wrestle with here and in the larger picture with the council and in the city is, how do we balance the various modes, including peds and walking, biking and rolling, and of course, autos and parking. That is part of a separate task. We're in progress right now. We have our engineering staff working on that, and they've worked with Ben and Justin, and we've been to the council measuring parking and different concepts. We have several different ideas, and really trying to look at those options. We intend to, once we have some more workable options, we'll go to the TAC, review that with the TAC. The TAC especially, not just the city departments, but also some comments we got from the TAC at our last meeting was from City of Berkeley, and how they rely on Solano Avenue as well as a through route, as a evacuation route as well from their city for people to get down. So we definitely want to go over some of the plans with the TAC, and then we will be back to this body and to the council in the next phase with hopefully some answers. So that's really all we have for Solano, I guess. We probably want to keep moving. If you all do have any comments or thoughts on it, I think Ben and Justin, we can probably speak to it a little bit. There's a lot of information that's already out there. So if we'll go to the next slide. Next one is San Pablo, and this one's a little bit more to chew on here. So this was a question, this has been a question that we've posed before, and it was a question in the last active transportation plan too. And it's, should San Pablo include designated facilities for biking and rolling? We definitely heard some comments, for sure, from the biking community. In fact, as I was walking in tonight, I saw a guy on a bike zipping right down in a lot of heavy traffic. The stance that the active transportation plan has taken so far, and this also mirrors what we're hearing from Alameda CTC and the neighboring cities, is that San Pablo is highly constrained. It's very, very tricky. And that one alternate option, because there's a pretty good grid layout in the network, is to develop parallel high comfort facilities one block off. So Keynes and Adams are the ones here for the most part. Those are already defined as bike boulevards and are intended to be used instead of what that gentleman's doing. But we got a lot of comments that they're really not up to the comfort level and the standards that folks want, that it's really not that much more convenient. A big problem is those crossings. Even though the roads themselves may be calm and may be okay, when you get to Marin and you get to Solano and you get to Washington and Portland, you got to cross, and the cross traffic doesn't stop. So that's definitely a comment that we heard, that if those are going to be an alternate route to San Pablo, that we need to upgrade them and make them a more viable option for folks to kind of go off their path, go off a block, and to really think that that's a better option for them. This is, as I mentioned, consistent with a few different things. This is more of a regional issue that's being tackled because it's a highly constrained corridor with a lot of demand. It's a transit corridor, it's an auto corridor, and it's a major way to get through the region. Alameda CTC has actually 2 different projects focused on this, and in both of them, they endorse the idea of developing parallel alternate routes as a high comfort alternative. And then also the NACTO, the Urban Bikeway Design Guide that we showed before, that talks about the all ages and abilities standard, also notes, it's the first NACTO was very much like, we got to do all these great bike things, and very, I guess, visionary. And as we've, again, drawn a lot of lines on the map and implemented a lot of projects, they're realizing the need in a lot of communities for some balancing. And so they really tried to not only to define really good bike standards, but note, what do you do when you have a really hard corridor and it's really tricky, and you have a lot of competing demands, including not just from cars, but from public transit as well. And so the idea of parallel alternate facilities that are of a high quality is something that we do have a basis for. That said, I would love if we could have a dedicated bikeway on San Pablo. For many trips, that is the most direct route. But again, we wanted to bring this to this body. This was the recommendation of the prior ATP, and for this one, and with staff, is to take the strategy for parallel high comfort facilities. And so when you see the maps, there's not actually a bike route on San Pablo itself. So okay, I think I've talked about that enough. If there's any comments or questions on that now, we can talk about it, or we can wait till I'm done with this stuff and talk about it after. I don't know what the protocol is. I can keep going.
Either way, if anyone does have any clarifying questions, that probably makes sense to ask now, but let's hold our comments until later.
Okay, thanks everybody. Okay, we can go to the next one.
Sorry, I actually do have a clarifying question. There was a section on San Pablo from Clay to Carlson that was previously identified to have bike lanes in the complete streets plan. So is there a reason why that wasn't also included as a priority segment? The way that
Can you flip back to the network map so we can, sorry.
yeah, no, good point. So like similar how the southern end does have a section of prioritized on San Pablo, the northern end from Clay to Carlson, just to our border, I suppose. Yeah, to the north. Is there a reason that specific section wasn't included?
That's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I'm not totally positive. I know that small section that is in there was part of the crossing project at Brighton and Clay. We'll have to check, but this is the kind of feedback that we're looking for. So if there was something that we overlooked, we definitely want to reflect that. And we'll need to check also with the feedback we received from El Cerrito and what their plan is too, because one of our goals for sure is to create hopefully a seamless experience as you cross the jurisdictional boundaries. So I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't know the specific answer unless, Angie, do you know? No, okay. But thank you for that comment. That's great.
Thank you.
I can just add one clarification. The alignment pending future study, little dots at the top. We have worked with El Cerrito and submitted grant, and I think we brought it through for recommendation from this body, that the idea is connecting from Adams to Carlson by cycling. That has some major challenges, including state ownership of property in between. So it's going to include looking at San Pablo as an alternative, and Adams, and even over on Madison. That, you know, the orientation center asked us to look at the permutations before coming back to them and saying, you know, again, why that one makes the most sense. So I would say it's sort of included in that fuzzy zone at the top of figuring out the best connection between those two facilities.
Thank you, Justin. That's a great comment. And maybe to kind of represent that more, we extend that little dotted blob down to that block, because that's a really good insight. Thank you. And we've got that down, and we'll check that against the Complete Streets plan as well to make sure we didn't overlook anything. Regarding the southern part of San Pablo, from Marin to the south, that actually is because there's an off-street path there, right over by the Barrens, and so that's on the priority network, but actually not on San Pablo itself, just a little bit west of the, I guess it's in the right-of-way, but it's west of the curb line there. And so that's why that's there. Thank you for being able to flip back to the map real quick. We might have to do that a couple times. Okay, so that's San Pablo, and again, we can talk more now or later, but if there's no further comments, we'll go on to the next one. These get successively more dense. So this one, okay, this is one of the slides. If my boss saw this slide, he'd say, never show a slide like that, but I feel like this is the group that maybe wants to see some of the data and get in the weeds a little bit. So Santa Fe versus Curtis. So looking over kind of on the east end of the city, one of the major north-south corridors. Santa Fe is the more major street. It is currently striped. It's got 2 lanes in each direction with street parking. And it's got what we used to call Class 3 or Sharrows. And now I believe it's called the shared street, according to the new NACDO. They've kind of dropped the Class 1, 2, 3. They've dropped that wonkiness and given it just kind of plain language titles. But some of the plain language words are a little bit like you got to know what they mean. So I'm not sure if that's better or worse. But either way, Santa Fe is the more major street, and you can see in the volumes there are 35 to 4,500 daily traffic, speeds just under 30 miles an hour. So the types of questions we want to ask for a corridor like this is, if we wanted Santa Fe to be all ages and abilities, what could we do? Like, how do we get it up to that standard? And so we look at things like the volume and the speed and the width to try to understand what that means. According to the NACDO standard for all ages and abilities, for a street with those volumes, unless we do something to reduce the volumes, but as long as we leave those volumes there, to make that all ages and abilities, you either need protected bike lanes, which we used to call Class 4 or cycle track, which has a physical barrier, or buffered bike lanes, but with speeds below 25 miles an hour. So you'd have to do some traffic calming there. Either one of those carves out specific lateral space for bikes, which most likely means you lose the parking. At least one side of the parking if you realign the street, maybe both. Again, we haven't done design on this street. This is just looking at simple cross-sectional widths. But for the most part, at this kind of higher level, in order to bring Santa Fe into the high comfort zone, that's the type of treatment that it would need. And of course, that also means at the intersections as well. This is really just kind of thinking about what it would mean on the segments, but that would also mean treating all of the intersections as well. Curtis Street is 1 block to the east. It is a much smaller street, kind of like a Keynes and Adams, residential, 1 block off the main street. Its volumes are much, much lower, as you can see, well under 2,000. Speeds, 25 to 26 was the last speed survey, so a little bit slower than Santa Fe, but for the most part, to make any of these streets hospitable to bikes, the max speed is like 25 miles an hour. So there's kind of traffic calming needed everywhere. Curtis does have slightly more slope, and we did a quick analysis and looking at it's overall about 10 feet more vertical gain. So for a cyclist, especially not in an e-bike, it's going to be a little more hilly. But it really, because it's got such low volumes and slightly slower speed, it opens up our options to use a shared street approach, or sorry, a shared space. I guess the shared street is just the Sharrows now, but a bike boulevard or advisory bike lanes, which are those ones with like the dashed lines that they can kind of float in and float out, but fundamentally a shared with cars. That is more possible on Curtis. However, we do need to get the speeds down, and all those intersections, all those blue dots that you see would need to be treated as well so that cyclists feel comfortable riding on that as a bike boulevard. And that could create some issues because there's a lot on Santa Fe, there's always stops, And so having other stop signs on Curtis, it may kind of, trigger some traffic things that we have to chase a little bit. But overall, these were our findings so far. And really, again, our core question is, if we want a street to be in the high comfort network, what does it take to get it there? And this is a really good example of how the answer could be two totally different facilities for two different streets, depending on the characteristics of that street. So if we go to the next slide, I think we have some recommendations. So for Santa Fe, it is a bikeway now. It's got the shared street sharrows. We would definitely recommend keeping it as such. It would be good to get the speeds down if we can. We heard a lot of comments about Santa Fe specifically, that it's kind of used as a cut through and it's kind of a speedway. So I think even if we weren't going to make it a fancy new bikeway, I think the recommendation definitely would be for traffic calming on Santa Fe, regardless of whether you do more things for bikes or not. And then on Curtis, the recommendation is to develop that one as the all ages and abilities facility with either bike boulevard or advisory bike lanes. Again, there's kind of two different types that could work there. That isn't necessarily something that we have to decide now. When it's time to develop Curtis Street as an actual project, whether we take a close look at it at the end of this project or when it gets into the CIP and the city is able to do design and a lot of outreach just about that specific corridor, that's when we can make some of the decisions over which specific facility. But the fact that it's a shared facility and that we can achieve the all ages and ability standard is kind of the key point. Obviously there we would need to implement traffic calming and enforcement as part of that. And I definitely want to point that out, that traffic calming is not just an engineering solution, but also requires enforcement to try to get speeds below 20 miles an hour for a bike boulevard. And then again, as I mentioned, the intersection treatments. So there's no easy answer for some of these. There's obviously trade-offs in terms of cost and in terms of parking and on speed and all those other things. But we definitely heard a demand for a north-south corridor in this part of the city, and definitely a lot of comments about Santa Fe being a little bit inhospitable for that. So that concludes this one, and there's only one more left. If there's no questions, we'll move on. And this is probably the trickiest one. And again, it's another slide that would fail slide making class. But there's all the info you need is right on here, hopefully. So Portland versus Washington. This is a similar question. It's about kind of an east-west axis in our network. As I mentioned, kind of one of the key things, there's a lot of factors that go into the network, and it just looks like simple lines on a map, but there's so many things you want to consider. And connectivity is really important. And what that really means, I mean, I guess that means being able to get to the places you want, but just in terms of developing a grid of lines and nodes that kind of reach every part of the city. And so in this part of the city, there's definitely a need for east-west connectivity. And in fact, both Portland and Washington probably would be appropriate for some level of biking rolling facilities. But really our question is which one of those should be the priority on the high comfort network? Which one of those should really be the one that the city invests in as a major east-west route through the city? So you can see the different speeds and volumes. Portland has slightly higher volumes, actually significantly higher volumes. It does have a school and a park right there, Albany High. And that's a tricky thing because the school and the park has a lot of active transportation demand. There's a lot of walkers and cyclists there, but that also creates a lot of auto demand for pickup and drop off at the school and for parking at the park. And so that kind of creates one of those streets where there's a lot of modes competing for a limited amount of space. Given the current profile of Portland with the volume and speed, it's really only option for a all ages and abilities facility is a protected bikeway, which is class 4 or cycle track. And that's mainly because of the volumes there. And when we see, I guess technically it's right at 2,900. If you can keep it below 3,000, you might be able to do something, but that's something that is likely, it's kind of right on the line. We felt that was doable, but maybe a little bit tricky. Looking at Washington, it has a much lower volume, and that gives us a little bit of flexibility there in terms of using shared space as opposed to carving out separate space. And, sorry, I want to make sure I can read what I wrote on my messy slide. The bike boulevard and advisory bike lanes, like we talked about last time, both of those would need traffic calming to reduce speed below 20 miles an hour and potential traffic diversion to ensure we keep those volumes below 2,000. Another thing about Washington you can see in the network connectivity map is it connects through across San Pablo, and that crossing where it kind of jogs is part of an existing project to improve those crossings. So there already is kind of just a pure network lines and nodes standpoint, it's got a little bit more connectivity in the east-west direction. And then also, you can't quite see it on this map, but I'm sure many of you know, the next street down from Washington is Solano Avenue. And depending on what happens with Solano, if there end up not being dedicated bikeways or high comfort bikeways because of the modes that we're trying to balance, having Washington be kind of the next one there also seems to make a lot of sense. So tricky one. We believe this should have treatments for both, and there's no perfect answer for this, but if we go to the next slide, we do have a little more information. We did ask a question about this in our public outreach, and this was kind of toward the end of our outreach, and we wanted to see, kind of like, we asked people to comment on the map and do all these things, and at the end, it's like, if you really want to get into the weeds with us, go ahead and answer these. And you can see there are only 35 people who answered, so this is not a scientific survey or a vote of the city. But we asked people who were invested enough to read these questions and think about them, what they thought. And I know it takes a little bit to absorb. But we definitely heard a demand for bike and rolling facilities on both. And there's a little bit of a selection bias here. A lot of people who came, a lot of people who commented are the cycling community who would like to see really good bike facilities everywhere. So some of this answer is to be expected, but we really kind of wanted to get at the preference issue, which one of these streets would be more important to you. And you can see the answers were somewhat split. The comment themes there, and these are 3 bullets, but this is kind of a summary of the various comments that we got. And I kind of mentioned this, that the school and the park on Portland could warrant a protected facility because of the high amount of bikers and rollers who go to the school and to the park. But also, we also heard from a lot of folks who said, boy, there's a lot of conflicts there, and there's cars trying to drop people off, and that's also really hard too. Many comments, again, emphasize that enforcement is really important, and we know that that's a resource issue, but that can really help. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about some of our recommendations for this. And again, this is something that we can discuss, and I think something that there's no perfect answer for. But our recommendation, based on the information we've got so far, is to include Portland in the network as a bike boulevard, but not on the high comfort network. And it's right on the line there. And so there is the all ages and abilities standard, but actually NACDO also has kind of a base standard for these things too. So it qualifies as a bike boulevard if it's got less than 3,000 cars. And then they kind of make the distinction. They say, but if it's got less than 2,000 and really low speeds, it could even be an all ages and abilities bike boulevard. And that may seem like a wonky distinction, but when you think about the fact that you're sharing a lane with cars, if anyone's ridden on one of those roads and you're in the Sharo and the cars are kind of bearing down right behind you, bless you, the busier that street is, the more stress that causes. And so because it's right on the line there, and because we want to be able to try to maximize what we can do, we felt that it would be a good as a bike boulevard with traffic calming and enforcement to get those speeds down. And then over on Washington, we were thinking that maybe be the better priority for the AAA facility, also as a bike boulevard. I'm trying to remember what we concluded on that. I know we went through lots of different options, but and that really to focus on high comfort treatments, traffic calming and enforcement. And I think I mentioned on the last slide, the volumes are like right on the line, and so thinking about the potential for some traffic diversion to get those volumes lower. But again, we know that can be somewhat controversial and cause some spillover traffic effects. So this is probably the thorniest issue that we have in terms of, that there's no clear winner. But these are some of the recommendations that we've gotten to so far at the staff level. So I think that's it. So that's the perfect time to take a question.
When you were comparing Portland and Washington, did you look at which are wider more?
Yeah, and Ben or Justin, can you speak to that? They're largely the same, but there's a slight difference in one part of the city, right?
East of Pomona, I think the widths are the same. Between San Pablo and Pomona, Portland is like 4 feet wider or something like that.
So because the right-of-way varies, in some ways the wider one is better, but because it varies, that can also make it a discontinuous type of facility depending on what you do there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is Washington actually wider again, or still west of San Pablo? I think it goes back to its previous width.
Well, there's not a Portland option west. I was just showing
Yeah,
between
that's-
San Pablo. Yeah,
Fair enough.
west of San Pablo, it's a narrower width.
And it is narrow there. Narrower than Portland, for sure.
But as he says, it's not a parallel option, so.
No.
Being, 40 to 45, I mean, that's pretty narrow either way. It doesn't really open up a lot in terms of, adding a protected facility. So looking at really the main options for these two streets is a shared facility, and so the one with the lower volumes. And then also, again, Washington not only has lower volumes, but it's got a little more connectivity in the network going to the west side, and it's closer to Solano, should it need to be a parallel route to Solano as well. I also wanted to mention for the school itself, we definitely recognize a lot of students ride to school and they're on the e-bikes and there's a lot of safety concerns there. We do want to have special policies and things to address school areas, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. But from a pure network connectivity standpoint, one thing that we do kind of see in the network there is you can see Albany High is at the intersection there of Portland and Key Route. And this won't work for all trips. It depends on where you're coming from. But the hope there is that a lot of students heading to the school could use a combination of Key Route or the Greenway to access it from a north-south axis, as opposed to using Portland as their primary route. And that doesn't mean that people won't use it, especially if it's a bike boulevard and if it's signed for bikes, people will take it. But if we can make Washington and Key Route a high comfort facility and really make it feel like it's a better, safer option for folks. Again, if you live in a place where Portland is the best way, you're probably going to take Portland, and that's why we do want to have a facility there. But it's not the only way to access Albany High, because it's at kind of a good intersection of the grid network there.
Clarification question on Portland. Is it, with the current demands or volume and speeds, would it currently be designated as a bike boulevard? Or what would need to happen?
Yeah, will you go back 2 slides? I wanted to look at the volumes again. Yeah, so it's just under 3,000, and Washington is just under 2,000. So then, I don't know, it's a slide trick. If you can go back like a bunch of slides to that NACDO table, we can see that the table's pretty simple, and we just need to flip back and forth. Oh, there it is, okay. So you can see kind of the main thresholds right there for volumes are 2,000 and 3,000. And really, I guess 3,000 is for the bike lanes. For a 40-foot street or a 45-foot street, that means you're going to have impacts to parking if you have actually striped bike lanes. So looking at the shared spaces, these are your thresholds right here, 1,000 or 2,000. Again, truly to make it an all ages and abilities bike lane. And then, like I mentioned, this is the all ages and abilities. NACDO also has kind of lower standards for non-all ages and abilities. And a bike boulevard actually is you can get up to 3,000. One thing that we heard also from a lot of folks is, we use these standards. These are kind of the best practice. It's the best we have, but it doesn't always reflect the reality out there. And in the beginning of this, I think when we came to you in December last year, we had a comfort map, and we got a lot of feedback on it. We did the comfort. There's a metric called level of traffic stress, and we did that, and we used all the metrics, and we came up with a map. We said, here's the traffic stress. People said, that's wrong. I mean, it was largely right, but a lot of people had a lot of comments saying this does not feel comfortable, and this is not good, and this is not good. And so this is a standard. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the standard that the city follows. This is a great guide as kind of a place to start. But if we're looking at certain streets and we feel that doesn't provide the level of protection or comfort that we want, it's up to the city on what they would want to recommend for that and what they want to put in the plan. But this is a really good place to start and some really good guidelines. What is the specific difference between a road with 2,000 versus 3,000? I mean, over the course of the day, it is less busy, but does that mean that, at any given moment that it'll be better? Not necessarily. It depends on where the cars are and when they surge and everything. And you can see there actually is a thing about the peak hour as well, although not a lot of our traffic data has that in it. But where we do have that, we used it. But again, it's a guideline. That was a really long answer to your question.
I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. I don't know the best way to ask it, but like if Portland would be considered a bike boulevard, but not a high comfort bike boulevard, with its compared to like how it is currently, would anything actually change infrastructure wise to like
That's a great
get it
question.
to that point.
And there's no specific answer to that. Bike Boulevard is, can have a number of different features, and it really depends on how the city wants to design them. I kind of see it in a transit perspective. It's kind of like BRT, bus rapid transit, which is a word that means something, but then when you actually implement it, you know, there's different, when you kind of starts to get watered down a little bit and say, oh, this is a bike boulevard, and maybe it doesn't feel like that to folks. So some of the key items are obviously having slow speeds and low volumes. Those are the two things that we talked about. Intersections are really, really important, and there's a couple different options. We talked about when you're crossing, really you're crossing any type of street, one great idea for a bike boulevard is to remove all the stop signs in the bike boulevard direction and have all the cross streets have to be the ones that stop. You can also do neighborhood traffic circles, little ones in there. They can that also act as deflectors for speed that actually slow down cars as well. There's a wide array of things, and actually one of the things we were just, earlier today I was meeting with the team, we were talking about trying to develop some standards for what that would mean. What does a high comfort bike boulevard in the City of Albany look like versus a regular bike boulevard? And we want to make sure we have guidelines, but that we don't, we're not too prescriptive on the standards, because that you can kind of paint yourself into a corner and you say, okay, everything with a green line has to have this, 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 and this, and then you find out at the project level maybe that something doesn't work or it's not exactly right for that. But we do want to have kind of like guidelines of what that could mean. So that was a long answer. I guess we're not quite there yet in terms of what is the specific difference, but we would want it to be at a higher level. We want it to be like a full bike boulevard with all the bells and whistles. But that's a really good question, and I think we'll need to dig more into that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
I think that might be
Good.
all we have, and I turn it back over to the team to talk about next steps.
Well, can we go back to the, I'm sorry, can we go back to one of the network maps?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter initially. Yeah, so on the walking network, down at the bottom in the Cardenisas Creek corridor, there appears to be something there. Didn't know there was anything going on there. Could you talk about that, staff or consultants?
I can speak to it a little bit, but you probably are a little more informed, Justin.
Similar to what I mentioned in the north and the south, we have the Jackson path that has a project coming to connect from Buchanan down to Monroe through University Village. We have vision for that to continue south, and that's just sort of showing we need, there's some thoughts on exactly where that connects, and we don't know exactly what that alignment is until UC makes decisions on the property to the south. So it's more the north-south
More
connection
north-south
that
than
that's
east-west.
supposed to
Okay,
be.
so that might change to a north-south set of asterisks?
Yes, that's a great idea.
Cool.
We see that now, that it's not clear what that means.
You know.
We were kind of buried in it for a long time. We had several different symbols, and we finally said, okay, we'll do the stars with the blob, add some directional.
Well, you've used 3 asterisks. You could exchange 2 of those for different symbols and, just have at it.
Lucky Charms.
Yeah. We were talking about Washington versus Portland, and I just want to add that we do have a study plan that increases the stop signs for east-west traffic at Key Route and Portland to 2 in the intersection for traffic going east and west.
Sir, when you say increases to 2, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So there will be 1 stop sign at the edge of the intersection and another stop sign for each direction, east-west, in the middle of the intersection. That's the preliminary design.
Where Key Route is divided by a median, you would stop
Thank you.
at the median halfway through the crossing of Key
thank you.
Route.
Yes, thank you.
So just one more thing to note on that.
Thank you.
I think that's it for my questions.
Very good. All right. Staff, any further comments before we throw it open for the public?
We just had a quick next step slide, unless there were clarifying questions still.
Next steps, look at that picture, I love it.
All done.
That was by staff, that wasn't us. It's great.
Or uphill, depending how you look at it. So where we go from here, we've got finalizing the active transportation network. So once we receive feedback from this commission and bring these final networks to the city council, we will be finalizing the networks and officially moving on to phase 3 of the ATP. Identifying and prioritizing projects. So this is part of phase 3 where we're going to determine which projects should come first to close the major gaps in the city's bike and pedestrian networks. And the step will include facility design recommendations and or options for key corridors throughout the city. We'll be developing supportive policies as part of phase 3. So developing city policies that just serve to complement the ATP goals and help facilitate the network's build out. And we'll be talking more about Solano Avenue in phase 3 as Pete mentioned, so continuing design development and public engagement on Solano. And then we'll be developing the draft active transportation plan, which we'll solicit feedback on as well. And, as I think is implied, all of those pieces of the third phase of the ATP will involve public feedback and stakeholder feedback, such as yourselves. So next slide, please. So just a quick recap of the 3 phases of the active transportation plan. So we'll be slowly shifting from phase 2 to phase 3 in the next couple months. And I think that is it before we open this up to questions and comments.
Okay. Any questions from the commission?
Yeah, just a clarification of what's coming up in phase 3. There was a note earlier. So just now, Ben, you mentioned that that's when we'll identify and prioritize projects. But then earlier, did it seem kind of like that point we'd also be identifying more specific facilities for already prioritized?
Yeah, maybe I can walk
areas.
through that a little bit. Sorry if that wasn't clear. So the city has a fairly built-out network. We know that some things need work. So once we have the networks established, we have the lines on the map. We were just actually meeting earlier about this with our team and kind of talking about the workflow of how we're going to do this. So we want to look at each intersection and each street in the city that's on the network, and we want to say, okay, if it's the bike network, does this block, does this segment have a bike facility? If so, is it up to the standard that we want? And so, some cases it might not at all, and so we want to add one. And so we say, okay, what type, should it be? But in many cases, there will be, it won't be up to the standard that we want. Yes, it's got a thing, but we heard from the community it needs to be better. So our goal is to kind of find all those gaps, find where the vision network, the final network isn't built out, and turn those into projects. So a thing that comes out of the end of this is a list of projects that says, okay, the network's 75% built. Here's the other 40 projects to get it done. And of course, the way you define it, you can slice and dice those or whatever, but we want to actually define a specific project. We have, I think, in our scope of work to identify, I think it's 10, there's a certain number of high priority projects. Once we kind of prioritize them, we say, okay, what are the ones the city wants to do first? We have more scope to actually do more design work and cost estimating and really get those in a state where they're ready to be added to the city's CIP. So that's like for the top, I think it's the top 10, I forget the number of projects, but it's kind of a subset. But there will be a larger project list of here's everything that's needed to be done to build the network. For that larger project list, ideally, we'll have a recommended facility type for each one. And in some cases, we may have option 1, option 2, option, or a preferred option and the backup option if the preferred doesn't work in terms of the feasibility, the stakeholder outreach or anything. So for that larger project list, we want to make sure that the city doesn't paint itself into a corner being too prescriptive about a project type before we've really, we're not at the level where we're doing corridor-specific outreach or corridor-specific design, with the exception of Solano and maybe the top 10 projects. But for a lot of the parts of the city, what we're envisioning is a project list that gives a few different options and hopefully has a recommended option. This would be the best one. But I guess I want to make sure we set expectations that the facility types that we recommend, we want to make sure that it's kind of, except for those top projects where we really do a lot more design work, we want to try to caveat those and say, this is what we recommend at this level of detail and knowing what we know now. We don't want you to get into a situation in 5 years where you've got this plan it says, oh, we're going to do protected bikeways here, and 5 years later, and there's a new council, and it's time for a project, and I say this because I'm having this experience in several other cities right now. The cyclists will come and they'll say, in the plan, you said you were going to do class 4 cycle tracks, so where are they? And the city can paint itself into a corner where maybe it is highly constrained and I don't want to say unable to, but it's very difficult sometimes to meet some of those requirements on these very constrained corridors. So we want to make sure that the ATP provides really strong recommendations, but isn't too prescriptive about locations where we don't have enough information. I hope that's not too much of a wishy-washy answer. But again, I think especially for some of these corridors where the decisions are hard and there may be some political controversy over them, we'll do the city a disservice if we try to make those decisions prematurely in this document without having all the outreach done and all the design done. But we'll do the very best we can, and like you saw, Portland and Washington and Curtis and Santa Fe, those are streets where we didn't do full-on design work, we didn't do full-on stakeholder engagement about the corridor, and we say those things have to be done, but we were able to come up with a recommendation that we think should be feasible, barring any fatal flaws or anything like that. Does that kind of help?
That helps a lot. Thank
Okay,
you.
good.
Yeah, thank you. Follow up, with those 10 high priority projects, is that something that you want feedback on now, or is there a better opportunity in phase 3 to help identify those priorities?
If there are certain places that I think we can take the feedback now. I mean, we haven't boiled it down to project lists yet, but I think this will help us start to define them. I'm open to that feedback, as long as Ben and Justin are okay with it.
That's a question for me. Given I live on Curtis Street, I have several opinions, but are we doing those later? And
Yeah, after we take public comment, we'll have our discussion and comments, definitely. Okay. All right, if that's it for clarifying questions, I do want to throw it open for public comment. Anyone in the audience? Come on up.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ian McLeod. I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission, speaking on my own behalf. I'd primarily like to talk about the bike network. And when we're talking about major goals, I think what is the goal? The goal is to increase ridership. I think that's the bottom line. So then the question becomes, how do you most effectively do that? And from what I've learned, from my experience, from things I've seen traveling cities all over the world, the way you do that is by putting protected bike lanes on all your major streets, connecting them internally, connections to other cities, making them continuous and direct. That's how you increase ridership. It's not by painting Sharrow's symbols on small streets. It's not by having parallel streets that are comfort designated. They're helpful. Parallel networks are helpful but not sufficient. So, I think we really need to recognize that. I think we need to recognize the fact that as you increase ridership, you are reducing car trips, correct? I mean, it goes hand in hand. It is kind of a zero-sum thing. So as we reduce car trips around our schools, we get more kids to schools on bikes, walking, et cetera, we are making our schools safer. We are making our city safer, and at the same time, we are realizing our climate action goals, and we're reaching our ATP goals of reducing vehicle miles traveled, we're reducing pollution in our city, we're making our city safer, greener, quieter. It's a much better network. Families will love it, parents will love it. We see the paradigm shift with cargo bikes, kids on the back, they love it. But why do most people say they don't want a bike? Because they don't feel safe. So you have to provide the safe network. And that network is protected, separated bike lanes. Why does a greenway have such high ridership? Because it's safe. People feel safe there. They're not harassed by cars. Cars aren't, speeding by them. On all the major streets, NACDO, this is including Solano, San Pablo, Marin, et cetera. NACDO says you have to have protected bike lanes on those streets per volumes and speeds. So I don't know why we would ignore that and do something different. So I think what I would really like to see is the map with the protected bike lane network. That's what makes a difference in how we plan and how we get to mode shift. And then I'd last like to just link the protected bike network to housing. We're going to create a lot more housing on San Pablo Avenue and probably on Solano Avenue. We need to provide alternatives to car use for our new residents, and we have to do that by having facilities right outside the front door for these new residents. So I really encourage you to go for it, think big, and be bold, and let's do it right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else in the audience? I don't see anyone from the public. Do we have anyone online?
If you want to speak to this item online, please use the raise your hand function. Go ahead.
Hi there, my name's Amy Smolens. I've lived in Albany for almost 40 years. I'm sure many of you on the commission and the public remember the monthly Bike About Town family rides, which the Albany Recreation Department organized on volunteers from Albany Strollers and Rollers led back in the 2010s. The rec department stopped those during COVID and didn't bring them back. This spring, I met Brian Tublin, the owner of new local business on Solano Avenue, Catawba Kitchen, and he was interested in hosting a family bike ride from his restaurant. So we at Albany Strollers and Rollers organized and Catawba hosted the revival of Bike About Town on Sunday, June 1st. On short notice, we had more than 90 people on bikes, from toddlers to seniors, every age and level and in between, on all types of bikes and bike seats, and we rode about 3.5 miles around Albany at a very relaxing pace. Everyone had a great time, and Catawba provided free drinks to everybody after the ride. The turnout, almost 100 people on an overcast morning. It was a crummy, cold morning without a lot of notice. Almost 100 people shows that the demand is there. People of all ages and abilities, families do want to ride their bikes to all the destinations in Albany. With almost 100 people, at that time, we had strength in numbers for a sense of safety for the most vulnerable rollers, but that's an unusual situation. In real life, kids need to be able to walk and bike to school on their own. We're in a 1 square mile town with year-round temperate weather. Hopefully that could also include limiting auto passage in school zones in the morning and afternoons, except for those with ADA needs. Most students can walk at least a few blocks with or without their parents. This would allow for safer passage for those walking and biking without them worrying about parents driving and idling. Also, residents, future residents, as the past comment or just mentioned, and visitors of all ages and abilities need to be able to walk and bike safely and comfortably to shop and eat in Albany's business district. For all of this, we do need separated facilities for everyone of all ages and abilities. I appreciate the diligence of the consultants in listening to the input from the public and working to ensure that people of all ages and abilities can bike and walk safely and comfortably to all destinations, including schools, parks, and businesses. Thank you for understanding that safe intersections are crucial to safe passage, and that connections to other cities and areas contiguous to Albany are critical. Thanks for understanding that car traffic needs to be slowed down for people to be able to walk and roll safely. From riding on Berkeley's bicycle boulevards, I've experienced that traffic circles do tend to slow drivers down. And obviously, enforcement does that as well. I look forward to continuing to give input in this process so seniors like me, people with young kids, and everyone in between can walk and roll safely and comfortably in and around Albany. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments online? Okay.
Not seeing any.
Then back to the commission for any comments and discussion.
Well, I'll start. So I'll say that I live on Curtis Street, just north of Thousand Oaks, and have in discussion of these streets, including Portland and Washington, I sometimes walk down to Solano. I often ride my beater bike and occasionally drive if I have multiple chores. So my opinions, and this has come up before on Santa Fe. We did a lot of work on speed humps on Santa Fe a couple of years ago because people drive very fast on that street. It's very wide. I am skeptical in my neighborhood you're going to get people to slow down. You'd have to throw a ton of traffic calming on Santa Fe to get people to slow down. It's fast. Curtis is way calmer, as you noted. The downside, on the corner of Curtis and Thousand Oaks, there is a little bit of a hill there. It's steeper than Santa Fe. It's downhill as you go north. The other issue with Curtis Street that leads to higher traffic speeds is Curtis Street, as you cross the county line, it becomes Berkeley Park Boulevard and it shoots straight into the Calusa Circle. So there's a surprising amount of people going fast because they want to get up to Calusa Circle. The street is pretty parked up at night. It's really parked up on Sunday mornings because there's a farmer's market on the circle. But in general, it's funny, if you live in a neighborhood like this for like 20 years and you ride your bike, you stop thinking consciously about what street is safer or not. You just kind of, in an evolutionary way, just go the safest way and don't think about it anymore. I hardly ever ride my bike on Santa Fe. I always would prefer to ride on Curtis. One other comment. There's a lot of people who come down Thousand Oaks to the west, and it crosses Curtis. At Caluso, it goes like, I'm trying to get oriented here. So north, south, there's Calusa, which is kind of the boundary of the steep part of the hills. Mm-hmm. And then there's Curtis, and there's Santa Fe. And Thousand Oaks is quite steep until you hit Calusa. And then there's another extended hill that comes down towards Curtis and down towards the schools on Thousand Oaks. Okay. So that intersection of Thousand Oaks and Curtis gets a lot of traffic accidents because people there's no traffic control on that. At least on Thousand Oaks, there's no traffic control. So we have fender benders on that intersection a lot. Yeah. Just FYI. As far as Portland, and I routinely, when I go to coffee at Flowerland, I walk through the park and right there by the school. It is a madhouse. You have the school, the swimming pool, the basketball courts, the tennis courts, the dog park. So there's a whole variety of activities going on in that little area. And therefore, it's kind of busy at odd hours. And I never ride my bike through there. I always go down to Washington, which is serene in comparison. So, and again, it's something I don't think about anymore. I just stay on Washington. Washington also has that funny little zigzag, which acts as a kind of a traffic calming device. Not the one on
Pomona?
But 2 blocks over, right?
Pomona is the dog leg.
So there's that dog leg there, and that slows traffic down. And also, I agree that that's a better street for bikes because it is just 1 block away from Solano. And after a while, you learn just to ride down Washington. And if you know where you're going on Solano, you know which cross street just to zoom down for 1 block to get onto Solano. Could you make traffic on Portland slower? Maybe. It's also an issue of how distracted the human beings are in addition to how many of them are in various vehicles. I think people are pretty distracted because they're trying to drop their kids off at the pool, or there's high school kids learning to drive and they're coming down there because they love to drive 400 yards in their car because it's cool. So these are just my observations over the years. One thing about bike commuting I urge people to keep in mind, because I bike commuted exclusively to campus for 11 years. When you picture people bike commuting. And if you have to do it exclusively, you have to do it in the dark at some times of the year and in the rain. So when you picture these idyllic bike paths, picture them in a pouring rain in the dark, because you'll be doing that too. So trust me, I did it.
Thank you. Other comments?
I've got comments.
Please.
Just on safety, yeah, we're talking about some routes like Curtis that may not be as well lit and certainly have crossing issues. I live on Santa Fe, so I'm the other viewpoint, and I bike on Santa Fe all the time. And did both with an acoustic and my electric bikes. On the south end, Santa Fe is a better connection via Page to the 9th Street, Berkeley Boulevard to West Berkeley. If you take Curtis, it gets a little more convoluted. You have to use Cedar, and the crossing of San Pablo is really not all ages and abilities. And we are doing work to calm Santa Fe. I guess in terms of Santa Fe versus Curtis, I think there was a bullet about sticking with sort of a, high speed versus high comfort. And I think identifying them as such and continuing to evolve both makes more sense to me. It was interesting you got more comments on the walk network than the bike network. From my own standpoint, I kind of got to the walk network page, and I'm on my laptop. I can't see what's coming next. I put a bunch of my bike comments in on the walk network because I got distracted and excited putting stuff in. So I wonder if people just got their yayas out with the first map and didn't necessarily go on to the second map.
Interesting.
Just a thought. On the walk map, I guess I don't have any direct comments. On the bike map, I noticed that so there's a connection noted to Spokane, from Spokane to Barron's at the city line. And one of the things that I've seen is that the greenway between Brighton and Fairmount is fairly congested. It's kind of a pinch point. It's also the last really long block before you get to the crossing of Fairmount and the BART station we're from. I think it'd be something to explore because there is no parallel route alongside that section of the pathway. I think it would be something to explore, recommending that people who want to go faster go on your street. Sorry. But consider taking Spokane at some point, to Barron's, to Fairmount to get to the BART station, especially if they're riding like an e-bike or if they're a road cyclist and they just want to go fast. Because those are mostly calm streets, wide open areas. Obviously Fairmount's a little more congested, but there are no pedestrians in the street, unlike on the Greenway. Michael, can you come to the mic?
Sorry. Barron's is next to the middle school where you have to do that funny little hump there because Barron's has been closed. That's the street. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the way I walk home from the BART station. So, yeah, it's a good way to go.
So it is possible to go through there on the sidewalk or over the wood chips. That seems like a minor issue. It's probably more about making it easier in El Cerrito to turn left off of Barron's onto Fairmount during morning traffic, for example. in identifying the turn, I always want to take one of the previous turns because you're going uphill and you want to turn as soon as possible. Anyway, something to consider later. So I don't have any big revelations about Washington versus Portland, except for Washington does go through east-west. We're going to put effort, or ACTC is going to put effort into improving the crossing at San Pablo. Washington also makes a better, less hilly connection to Peralta and over to Marin. I use it to get over on the to that area, and then I choose Washington because when I'm going southeast, because I'm closer to Washington, but I also think it's less hilly to take Washington to get to Colusa and to connect to Milvia in Berkeley. So at least eastbound, Washington's my choice there. If Curtis was to be made into a high, or into an all ages and abilities pathway or route, could we put a stop sign in on Solano to support it?
Is that, can I answer? Is that a question?
They're not going to.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I would have let you guys do your comments before I pipe up. But yeah, for sure, part of the goal, if that's going to be on the high comfort network, we would need to treat the intersection. I did mention, because there's stop signs, I guess on Solano there's a signal there, right, on Solano and Santa Fe. And so putting a stop sign immediately, there's a little bit of analysis we have to do for that. But the goal for sure would be to the greatest extent possible, to treat the intersection so that it's a true bike boulevard. People can ride right through with high comfort. That would be the goal. But again, we haven't done intersection level design or anything to really look at it.
Is there anything preventing us from putting stop signs on Solano in general?
I am not fully familiar with the city's traffic policy, but generally, for stop signs, you need to meet warrants for that. Again, I would need to talk to the city about their specific process, but the city can do it, but it has to follow its own policy and some state things as well. So I can't give you a full answer, but it is the city streets, but it needs to follow its own process to get a stop sign. Justin, Ben, could you guys know anything about that process from the traffic engineering standpoint?
You would have a lot of issues to put a stop sign on Solano Avenue, but it is not something we've fully explored. But you have transit that would be impacted. You have signals that would be impacted. You have high volume on Solano that would not be able to flow nearly as fast.
Okay. Well, I'm just throw back to consultants that I would urge you to consider stop signs.
Yeah.
On Solano, especially at an intersection like Curtis or an intersection like Peralta.
If I can note, I guess, in general, to respond to a few of the comments, including from the two members of the public who spoke, from a active transportation planning and design standpoint, it is true the highest level facilities would be better if that was the sole thing that you were focusing on. And as an active transportation planner and designer, I also would love to see that as well. The guidance from NACTO and Caltrans and everything I think I mentioned has begun to incorporate, they've begun to realize that there's a lot of political controversy about some of these things, in addition to engineering issues and stop signs and warrants and all that. And so there's definitely a big attempt to try to balance modes. But I do want to be clear, if the objective was purely to provide the most hospitable biking environment, in general, protected bikeways are the way to do that. But we know, and anyone who's been to the council meetings talking about Solano knows that there is a lot of differing opinions and, frankly, political controversy around doing that, and it makes it very difficult for cities to make those decisions. So this is an attempt to try to balance that and to provide the city with tools to balance that. But again, as a active transportation planner, some of those questions like, well, why can't we put a stop sign there? In many cases, the city can, but the city has its own processes and stakeholders that it's trying to work with to find a compromise.
Yeah.
But I just want to clarify that, yeah.
Yeah. And Ken McCroskey's process has changed over the years, and he has had a lot of time to think about the best solution for biking and walking on Solano. And he realizes that in some sense, the absolute best situation for everybody walking on biking on Solano would be to close it to motorized vehicles. Hands down.
There's
It's not a question.
all over California.
But there are political realities.
Right.
So Ken has decided that stop signs would be more acceptable than closing the street, politically. So that's why I'm charging you with still considering stop signs.
For sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for listening.
Ken, I'm sure you have more comments, but since it's kind of topical, can I jump in? It also makes me think about in Berkeley on MLK, I forget the cross street, but it's just one south of University.
Madison.
Yes, thank you. That's a great crossing that I don't think has a stop sign, but it.
RFB.
Yes, and it only allows pedestrians and cyclists to make that cross across MLK. Super useful. I accidentally took the other street once, and it was horrible. So it's very comfortable and effective, and that's just one street down from University where there is a signal. So I think that's an effective strategy as well.
Which intersection is that again?
Yeah, that's MLK and what was the cross?
MLK and Addison.
Allison.
There is a raised median, and then to prevent through traffic on the bike boulevard, and then RFBs to assist bikes and pedestrians with crossing MLK.
There's one at Cedar and 9th as well.
Yes, and another one at Dwight in California. Put them in.
Was that all you wanted to put in there?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So you've asked us about San Pablo, and from my standpoint, the parallel routes are a great stopgap. In the long run, I would love to see a cycling facility on San Pablo that supports not only through traffic, but access to the individual businesses and homes. I think we should still pursue improving the parallel routes, but I think we should put San Pablo on our long-term bicycling network as a goal. One of the things that, there are a lot of issues with parallel routes. One of the ones that I didn't think about was that the streets are quieter. And that is actually a detriment for people who have issues with personal safety. If there aren't people around, if it's dark, it can feel very lonely and exposed. Anyway, I think that's about all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Judy?
Yeah, I think this is a very good document, and I want to thank you for presenting it. And I don't have a lot of comments about the particulars. I think generally there's more detail that will follow, clearly. A couple points that I did want to make in regard to Portland versus Washington. You mentioned how frequently, or with what consistency, I guess is a better way to say it, consistency there can be with times of day. And it's very clear that a cycle route up Portland is going to conflict greatly with middle school and high school traffic. For that reason, and for that reason alone, I think Washington is a better choice. You mentioned that there was some work being done with the schools and that you had a plan that wasn't yet formulated about how to address the issue of so many people coming out at the same time in so many different ways, pedestrians and micromobility devices and bikes and cars, all trying to hit the same quarter mile of streets at the same hour of the day. That would be a welcome suggestion. So I would, if that's not part of the active transportation plan, I would encourage you to pursue it in whatever capacity you're going to pursue it. But generally, I think the document you presented tonight is worth recommending to council. I don't have a whole lot of other things to add.
Thank you. And if I can just note for the schools, that is part of our scope. It is a very tricky problem to solve. It's an issue largely of supply and demand, and there is more demand for that space than there is supply. In general, a big part of it is kind of creating zones. It's trying to separate those uses. Albany High and Albany Middle, actually, like I mentioned before, they are kind of on a grid, so they have two different axes by which you can try to connect to them. So, some of the ideas would be to do. There's new strategies for curb management because of Uber and Lyft and all that. There's some new ideas on how you manage curbs and how you can do that. But in general, the goal would be to kind of have a space for the cars, and ideally people who are biking and on the e-bikes and stuff are coming in a different way.
One-way traffic.
What's that?
One-way traffic.
Right, but it is, I guess, I don't want to over-promise here. It's fundamentally a supply and demand issue. The best we can do is try to manage it and channel it, but it's a really hard issue.
And then just a question for staff. When I was doing my orientation to the commission, I remember being told that if a discussion was within 500 feet of my place of residence, was it 500 place of residence, that I should withhold my comments. Did I understand that directive correctly, or does it not apply in this instance, or?
If the commission is making recommendations to council or acting on projects that are within 500 feet, you
projects,
should
not
recuse. But if we're talking about a citywide planning document.
Thank you for clarifying. That's all.
Thanks.
That's a good question, because I think we'd all end up recusing ourselves if we came down to that. So by necessity, we do have to participate.
So, I think to the idea about like being around schools and how things currently work with the current condition, it's kind of same thing applies to San Pablo. As the public comment mentioned, with more ridership, we're going to have fewer cars. So it's hard to imagine it now, but I think we really have to like push ourselves to think about not what the infrastructure is going to look like if it were just magically dropped in tomorrow and like with our current conditions, but like these are long-term solutions that are going to have trickle-down effects, positive effects. So, as we're prioritizing protected bike lanes by a school, that also is going to decrease the car demand as well. And similarly, along San Pablo, it might be hard to imagine it now having protected bike lanes along San Pablo, but with the changes in the future, as discussed by public comment and by the commissioners, new zoning and land use plans, the vision for San Pablo is going to change a lot too. So I really, really support and push for including San Pablo as a priority network, thinking of it as what we want it to be long term. We already kind of talked about how San Pablo already is high priority towards the south. We talked about the part towards the north, which is included in the Complete Streets Plan. So all that kind of just leaves is the middle there. And there's already crossings that we know need to be improved, which, except for like Solano, you gotta be on San Pablo at some point for any of those crossings. So, that already is kind of adding in little chunks, little by little onto San Pablo. So it creates a really disjointed, opposite of a network, to have just these segments. So my just kind of push was like, why not just make that whole thing? If we already have the south end, north end, some intersections along the way, make the whole thing high priority. I understand that there's a lot of ongoing planning with all the other stakeholders you mentioned, and I'm not sure what the implications there might be, or like if we feel like it's putting us into a corner by calling it a high comfort network in this plan, but if there's any kind of, I don't know, disclaimer or something that needs to be added to say that there's, other plans ongoing, I'd rather have that disclaimer and the inclusion of the high priority rather than just excluding it altogether. I think that's all I had on San Pablo. To the Marin versus Portland and Santa Fe versus Curtis discussion, it's clear that one choice out of the two, they're all going to affect each other, right? So, we talked about needing to have traffic calming on both options, no matter what. And so regardless of which option we choose, it seems like it needs to be kind of like a joint effort between those two parallel streets. And right now in the network, they are both shown as a blue line and then the green high priority. So I know it's communicated in that way, but then I would push for there to be a way to communicate or at least commit to those improvements happening together. Especially if, intersection changes are being made or traffic calming are being made on I guess let's say Washington is selected as our high priority, high comfort. That might push traffic onto Portland. So including the traffic calming measures on Portland with the Washington project, I'd like to see that be done together because they influence each other. And then finally, just wanted to emphasize some of the high priority intersections that we saw a lot of the public comment on, at least from what we still have access to on the online portal. The major intersections that I really want to emphasize are the hottest point on that heat map around Marin, but specifically getting onto Keynes from Marin. There were a lot of comments about that. I definitely want to emphasize that section. And then the other section I want to emphasize is getting from Adams to Jackson. I was really happy to see the summary of the comments and the emphasis on connectivity and closing of gaps, and you emphasize that in the presentation, which is amazing. And I think that this is a huge gap right now that I'm glad to see a connection between Adams and Jackson, but I really want to make sure that that supports travel in both directions. Just with the configuration of Buchanan going through it, that could be kind of tricky. So that might look like a two-way bike lane, protected bike lane, just on that little triangle segment there. But I think that is, yes. So that's just like a really tricky section right there. But there's, speaking of connectivity, like that hits two of the major points of connection, which is, like you said, from facilities and then also intersections. It connects the village to the north and through a very important intersection, and the school. So, and definitely appreciate all the emphasis on intersections That's a huge priority. And one more thing to mention as a prioritization. I love seeing Marin as a proposed high comfort network, especially with the ongoing study of Solano. I know there's a lot of mention. People always reference like, oh, well, why don't people just ride down Marin? Right now it's pretty unsafe, especially with the high speeds. So a lot would need to be done to make that high comfort, and glad to see it. Just want to emphasize that my support for that designation.
Thanks. If I can respond just really briefly to those. For Marin, that is a regional, flagged to be a regional bikeway by Alameda CTC for high comfort as well, so that comports really well with what the region's trying to do. Thank you for the suggestion on the intersections. Those are great. We'll write those down. We agree with some of the, especially that area right around here, Buchanan and Adams and Jackson and all that. I guess I'm working backwards up your list here. For the parallel corridors and kind of doing those together, I think that's a really great idea because they will affect each other. One of the things we need to help the city do in the next phase is to prioritize, and this is going to turn into a lot of projects and a lot of cost, and so grouping them like that can be advantageous in some ways, but it also can make it farther from reality because we're kind of biting off a lot. So there's definitely going to be a balancing between like kind of quick build and all that stuff. But and certainly the project list that we come out with, as the city starts to tackle those, they may break that into two or combine them also, depending on what makes sense for the city. So that's the last one. And then for San Pablo, and is it San Pablo or San Pablo? I hear everyone says it different ways. I don't want to sound like an outsider.
Pablo.
I always hear Pablo.
It varies. Don't worry.
It's Albany, not Albany.
Yes, I do know it's Albany. I grew up right outside Albany, New York, and I'm very happy to be back in Albany. Weather's a little nicer here. But for San Pablo, that's a really hard one, and I guess I really do like your suggestion to put it in the network as a long-term vision. Like you said, it does have to have a lot of disclaimers. By putting that line in there, then you are. I kind of talked about some of these are political decisions, and you have to have the political will. You can start to create political will by putting it in the plan, and that's one way to move it forward. But I will say then that's setting up the city for future political fights, right? Which maybe, to create the political will to make those decisions, maybe that's where we need to go. But I just, again, want to just note that can be kind of a kick the can down the road thing. Okay, that's all. Those are my responses. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Well, I just want to say I think this is great. A lot of good efforts gone into this. Listening to the community, presenting something that's going to help us to move forward in improving safety and comfort. So some specific comments. I'll start with San Pablo Avenue since we were just talking about that and having been involved in a lot of conversations around it. I think my first conclusion is when we look at different modes, San Pablo has to have transit. It is the only north-south street that realistically can serve as a transit backbone in this area. We cannot sacrifice the ability to have high-quality transit, possibly BRT, on San Pablo. That said, keeping it as a bike, goal and aspiration, and in particular, doing as we have done, implement bike lanes as feasible. When the opportunity comes up, a development comes up, and they give us some space, that's where we get the space we don't have. And so I would want to be clear that when we list it as a priority route for bikes, that it's a priority for getting the things that we need in order to make it feasible long-term, not that we're saying we're going to immediately embark on a project. But that aspiration that we eventually want it to be both, but we can't achieve both right now, is to me important to be clear about. So with respect to some of the other sort of A or B options, I find that I like to bike faster, and I'm more tolerant of being around traffic. I don't think all the streets should be designed for me. But, and I've told people many times, between the Albany Greenway and Masonic, I will ride on Masonic on the street because I ride too fast for my comfort and the comfort of people around me on the Greenway. So we kind of need to serve both. And so that goes back to the try to advance them in parallel when feasible, so, yeah, or at least list them both.
Yeah.
So Portland, I agree, is carrying way too much school traffic to divert the traffic or lower the traffic volume significantly. It is the route that my son insisted on riding to Albany High every day, and I was perfectly comfortable riding that with him. I think that Washington is the high comfort route, and Portland is the high speed bike route. Similarly with Curtis and Santa Fe. Santa Fe is flatter as a lazy cyclist who doesn't like to stop at every stop sign and therefore avoids the routes with stop signs, because I do stop at every stop sign. And I prefer flatter routes. I'm always going to pick those. But that kind of comes back to the comment you made about we should remove stop signs from bike boulevards so that we don't cause unnecessary stops and slow people down. And then that opens up and what do we do to keep cars from taking advantage of that? And you can do things like we're done in Milvia, where we kind of went, we'll throw in a one-way block here and a one-way block going the other way there. So through traffic can't get through. There's no incentive for cars to use that route. That's where the medians on Addison at MLK and so forth come in, because that's facilitating good bike flow while preventing through car flow. So that kind of treatment where Curtis has to cross Solano, I think that is much more favorable than just putting in a four-way stop, because the four-way stop will then make it easier for cars to cross Solano as well, and we don't want to do that. We want to just prioritize the active transportation modes. So, and that will help to minimize the impact to transit on Solano, things like that. So in terms of kind of methods for how do we achieve these enhancements at the nodes crossing arterials, I really like that type of approach. And every location is different. So it's not, do this everywhere, but find those ways with beacons and medians and things of that type. So we don't just resort to the old tools that we had that don't really address all of our needs currently. So what else? I think I've kind of touched on all the A or B stuff that we've got. And I think that as we move towards a project list, I am reminded of how long it's taken us, and I'd say we're not done yet, obviously, of converting Marin Avenue from a 4-lane arterial where you'd have to be nuts to ride a bike to at least we've got bike lanes. Now they're paint buffered bike lanes. We've got bike path on part of it. I'd love bike paths everywhere, but the reality is where we have them now is where we don't have fronting property, residential properties and so forth. But everything is incremental. And so pursuing the incremental enhancement is, in my mind, necessary often, rather than having an effort to achieve the perfect but short-term unachievable. We may get to that perfect, and it shouldn't stop us from trying. That's kind of my philosophy. Let's take what we can get and be realistic about the projects that we can pull off. Sometimes those aspirational things, we're going to get to them sooner than we think. So we shouldn't take them off the table, but being realistic in how we approach it. Obviously, in the next phase, we'll talk about prioritizing things, but I think it's fine by me to have a huge list and say out of these 100 projects, really these 10 are the ones we're working on now. The other 90, we'll think about them, and new opportunities may come up that they may change in future, but just being clear that we're probably never going to be satisfied. We're always continuing to evolve, and I think that the idea that we're not going to have everyone on bikes or everyone on transit any more than we want everyone driving, but everyone's going to have to do one or more of those things. And so the idea that we have space to accommodate everybody is important, because that's what's politically going to get us things that are achievable. And I think we haven't gone into it too much, but the idea of, as we're trying to make some of these streets, the bike boulevards, lower traffic volume, those things about diverting traffic, one-way segments, the concept of you got one traffic lane and two bike lanes, and that sort of thing. That's where we start to get more creative, hopefully, and achieve calm bike routes where people on bikes don't have to stop arbitrarily, and it really is comfortable and highly functional. So I've rambled on enough, but again, thank you and really appreciate this. I think that our next thing here is we have given lots of comments, and the recommendation that is before us, if anyone wants to make that motion, essentially that we want the council to approve the draft ATP networks, including our comments. Well, we've made our comments, so we don't have to add the comments in the motion. If anyone wants to
Well,
make,
I think it would be more clear if we did make a motion.
please do.
So let me attempt one.
Commissioner McCroskey, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know it's like
please.
against the
No, I don't mean to.
Robert's rules, but I did want to note, we've heard, I think, from three of you, the desire to put San Pablo in the network, at least some sort of like a long-term vision or something like that. And I wonder, this is our plan. We can make it whatever we want. We could certainly have kind of a phasing thing, and we have the regular network, and then we say, hey, these 2 or 3 are special corridors that we want as like a long-term goal. We want to have bikeways, but we recognize, we could certainly have that in the plan, and I wonder if maybe that might be this commission's recommendation. Like I said, I think I heard 3 of you say that might be good to have, and that we don't necessarily want to give up on San Pablo.
Yes.
So I wonder if maybe you want to include that in your motion? Were you going
Yes.
to? Okay, sorry. I just wanted to
It's
clarify
okay.
that. Thank
Yeah. Tell you what, I'll draft my motion, and if I leave anything out, let me know.
I'm sorry.
No. We work together here. Absolutely.
I just didn't want to get a motion out before we had a chance to say that. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Very
Thank you. And part of it's that I was looking this direction, and you were probably making faces over here, so I couldn't see that. So make a noise. Yeah. Great. So for San Pablo Avenue, we would like to add San Pablo Avenue to the bicycle network as a long-term goal, with the aim of capturing space for off-street bikeways as projects allow. Projects may not be the right word, as opportunities present themselves. In the meantime, we would like to continue improving the parallel bikeways. I'm not actually going to put anything about Solano in, if that's okay with the rest of the commissioners.
That's fine. That has its own process.
Yeah. For Portland and Washington, I believe we have a general consensus on Washington as the high comfort arm of a paired corridor, with Portland being the high stress. Is that the term you're using?
I wouldn't necessarily say it. We don't want it to be high stress.
High speed.
You were saying high speed, but
Less comfortable.
less comfortable.
I think if I say as the less calm alternative, I say that.
I guess to use the terms of this, right, one is on
Please.
the designated network, like the regular network, and one is on the priority network.
There we go. So we're going to put Washington on the priority comfort network.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. And we're going to put Portland as a designated
Like a regular bike.
regular
network.
We need better names for
on the regular network.
the base network, yeah.
Okay.
We'll come up with some catchier names next time we come see you. It'll be clear.
I'd love to help you with some branding.
Please do.
Yeah, but let's get together later. On San Pablo and Curtis, on Santa Fe and Curtis, we see Santa Fe as being on the network, but higher volume, less comfort, and Curtis should get improved as the high comfort, all access and all ages and abilities route. I'm getting lots of feedback from over here. I'm not getting much feedback from over here. That's
going.
okay. I think that's it.
Was that actually, is that supposed to be the motion? I'm sorry, I can't vote on something like that. I need a more condensed statement, so please
Well,
try.
these are complex issues, and
They
I
are.
can attempt to do it again.
Yeah, please.
That's fine. Before I do that, are there any requests for changes in IC2?
Well, I will just say that, regarding San Pablo, there's two problems. This will not prevent me from voting for your motion, but one, it's a state highway. We also have to keep that in mind. And two, ACTC, Alameda County Transportation Commission, just did a reconceptualization of the whole corridor a year or two ago. So, I don't know. It's nice for us in Little Albany to say, hey, this is what we want, but it seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem real pragmatic.
That sounds more like a vote than a change or a suggestion.
Yeah, that's just an objection, but like
Yeah,
I said, I just wanted to raise the issue so it's on the record, and I'm happy to vote for perhaps a more concise.
Okay.
I think you both just shared your thought of excluding Solano from it, but I might suggest in a way that we do include Solano, if anything, just as a designated, with the understanding that there's a lot of other conversations going on. My concern, and maybe you can dispel this if I'm wrong here, but my only concern is that by not designating it in one way or not as a network, that conflicts with any future planning or prioritization of, if someone can look back on this network and show that we didn't choose to prioritize it, does that impact that planning?
I think that's fine, including it as a facility, but not a priority network facility is consistent with what council has asked us to develop. So if you want that reflected on the map, they'll have an opportunity, when we bring the more developed concept in phase 3 to see the details of what that looks like.
That's a great way to put it, that it's more consistent with what has already been discussed by council. So I might add to include Solano as the that second nest designated
Yeah, like
network.
the blue line, yes. We'll
Blue
come up
line.
with a better word for it. But like I said before, there's no reason why we can't make a special category for those two corridors and say, it's aspirational. We would like for this to be bikeways. We recognize this is hard. There's a lot of competing interests for this space. So I think we certainly could kind of call those two corridors out, or one corridor, whatever, as like kind of a subset of, special stuff. We want it to be bikeways, but we recognize it's going to be a little harder to get there. We can certainly put that in the plan and make it a thing.
Okay. So Ken,
I don't think I'm ready to be specific about Solano Avenue, and I don't think we're past the point where we can add it to the network. So my resolution would skip Solano at this time in favor of readdressing it at a later date.
Just as long as it doesn't, I guess, impede progress potentially by not including it, then yeah, I hear you.
It's a separate process.
Okay.
And I'm seeing from staff that, at least over here, that that's not an issue. But you have something?
Not really. I mean, we would like to have the network, kind of the bones of the network set. So if we do think we're going to put a blue line there at some point, it might be good. But no, this is not the last bite of the apple, and Solano is on a separate track. So we can reconcile them all at the end.
Actually, I'm not sure either of the lines offered would be appropriate for Solano, either a shared use path or an on-street bikeway.
I think on the I guess that's the
There is the proposed high comfort network. I'm looking at the bike map.
Yeah, the bike map. So the
Anyway.
the light blue line?
The light blue line is on-street bikeways specific,
Right.
and we're not to the
I
point
see what you
of
mean. Okay, yes.
being that specific. So it appears, it's been shaded out a bit, but it appears that, I don't know. Solano is a special corridor.
We will have a chance to revisit that. Let's leave it at that for now.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the only other thing, I don't have like the good flowery words for it, and maybe it's not necessary to include, but anything about developing the Washington and Portland and Santa Fe and Curtis together. But if that is something
Reed's
that's
been working
more
on something.
phase 3, then I'm good to exclude it.
No, that's part of what we've been asked tonight. Do you want to offer a motion?
Sure. So the motion would be that the Transportation Commission recommend the City Council approve the draft active transportation network inclusive of the following suggestions from the Commission: that San Pablo Avenue is a transit priority route, but should be listed as a long-term, high-comfort route, acquiring needed space as opportunity arises. That Solano is to be studied for inclusion in the network as part of a separate project. That Curtis and Washington be designated as high-comfort routes, and that Santa Fe and Portland be designated as part of the regular network. That's basically it. Thank you. Any further comments before we vote on that? Okay, please take the roll.
Commissioner Barnes.
Yes.
Commissioner Hiley.
Yes.
Commissioner Kerr.
Yes.
Commissioner McCroskey.
Yes.
Chair Javindal.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you all. That was a really good discussion.
Thank
And
you.
Appreciate
Gave
it.
us the type of guidance and input that we were seeking, so thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.
We'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much. Okay, that was quite a substantive discussion. On to item 4.2, the Albany curb ramp guidelines and vertical barriers. And we'll get a presentation from staff on options for treatment of vertical barriers in or adjacent to the pedestrian path of travel, and provide comments back to staff.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Allison Carrillo. I'm the CIP Program Manager with the City of Albany. Let's see. So I don't think our presentation will quite be as meaty as what we just heard. Given where we are in time, I'm crossing my fingers. So tonight, what I wanted to do was start with a discussion of some toolbox options regarding raised curbs. Types of treatments, kind of standardizing some implementation of them, and some additional considerations, but I'll start with some background information on why raised curbs kind of exist in the right-of-way. To start with, raised curbs that we're talking about tonight are not what you see on the bottom half of that photo, a typical curb. When we're talking about raised curbs, we're kind of talking about what's on the far end, or the top half, a raised curb that is outside of our standard curb and gutter that conveys stormwater flow. They're generally 4-inch to 6-inch high, and they are found around curb ramps or for other types of protective measures. So the raised curbs are becoming more prevalent, especially in our limited right-of-ways, and the need is expected to increase. So some of the reasons this is happening is, as we hear tonight, we're trying to squeeze more and more facilities into the same right-of-way, bikeways, other transportation elements, and there are times when we need to separate them. There's increased canopy desires, and so some of these are coming around potentially building out, widening sidewalks, things like that, and we may need to kind of adjust curb lines or otherwise create spaces. Stormwater facilities is probably the largest one we're anticipating to see. because the green infrastructure, installation of green infrastructures is going to require quite a bit of real estate. And in order to make sure that the drop-offs, which can be significant in order to capture the amount of stormwater infrastructure we need and minimize parking impacts, requires fairly deep basins. It is a requirement of both California Building Code, which applies to right-of-way, and ADA requirements and regulations that there be some kind of edge protection. That can be things such as the raised curb you see here. It can also be railings. Those are two example options. Additional requirements are because of vertical grade changes that we are unable to, because of, again, usually right-of-way constraints, spread out enough to separate. Drainage control is a major one that we need to consider. City of Albany does not have storm drainage infrastructure in a wide array of streets around town. Green infrastructure, as I mentioned earlier. Retaining of soil. This happens a lot at the back end of sidewalks, at private property, kind of retaining structures, whether it be short curbs or larger retaining structures. Traffic control and pedestrian safety. Accessibility benefits and kind of accessibility requirements. And often there's a maintenance consideration because a raised curb can often take quite a bit more traffic impacts before requiring maintenance to address versus a railing of some sort. So here's some examples of regulations that include the use of raised curbs in certain situations. I mentioned PROAG, California Building Code, all have certain requirements and certain various elevation changes in which these raised curbs or alternatives are installed. One thing to bring up about the PROAG changes is that, and also this is also California Building Code, as well as desires expressed by the Commission, is for directional curb ramps. Although PROAG does not require directional curb ramps, it just requires one curb ramp at each direction of travel. It can be angled separately than the direction of travel. But one curb ramp for each direction of travel. That means in our, again, limited right-of-way, we're taking a much wider sweep around our intersections, and we are addressing kind of more significant need to kind of manage where our pedestrian access route is. Speaking of pedestrian access route, it's probably a good chance also to cover background in terms of ADA on the differences between a pedestrian circulation path, which is essentially all the places we expect pedestrians to potentially stand, congregate in, access, other than, say, a landscaping strip or a bench or something like that, versus a pedestrian access route. Pedestrian access route is regulated by PROAG. It's an accessible, continuous, and unobstructed path of travel. And we have landscape areas. Now, this is our textbook ideal of what these would look like. So we have a frontage zone. This is the zone that is immediately next to buildings or properties. In City of Albany, these wide open spaces where there's plenty of room to create gradual changes that allow continuous access to all zones looks more like that. Our frontage zones are often 1 foot, our furniture zone are often 18 inches, and our pedestrian access route is maybe on average 5 feet wide at most. And so we're looking at far less room to make our grade changes, necessitating raised curbs. I will say, just to make it clear, we do not try to put raised curbs in. Our ideal situation is to use a landscape strip to control and show it, demonstrate a detectable way that there is no crossing, or to say this is a detectable method of saying you are leaving the pedestrian access route. However, there are situations where it is unavoidable, which I'll cover a little bit. To kind of zoom out a little bit, there really is no one-size-fits-all approach to how curbs are managed, where landscapes fit, and part of the reason we have design guidelines for curb ramps is to be able to start creating a standardization and consistency across the city on how we approach things. What's very familiar now may not be what's there later, but the more we can make people feel like my intersection is similar to other intersections, the more we can protect people and make sure that they understand where the pedestrian access path is, or the pedestrian access route is. With that, kind of going into all the different times we kind of evaluate to try to avoid raised curbs and where they may need to be entertained. So we start with our curb ramp our city standard details and curb ramp design guidelines. This is what we provide for designers for them to start. And we have refinements during design, as our curb ramp design guidelines indicate where we can't accommodate or achieve the goals of the guidelines. We will be coming back to Transportation Commission to discuss and consider some site-specific constraints. Adjustments based on field conditions during construction also occur. And this is where I think having a mutual understanding of what we're looking for when it comes to places where, due to construction issues, we may find that it's unavoidable to install a raised curb following our conversations at this Transportation Commission and at City Council. And finally, post-construction. Transportation improvements are hands-on. Each site is different. How people use the sites are different. And post-construction, closing out a project and then walking away does not achieve what our ultimate goal is to make it a project that everyone's proud of and happy with and achieves the end goals of the express project. And so even post-construction, city staff are looking at what is out there and minor changes. The ideal goal is to make the major changes during planning and design, followed by minor improvements post-construction. For a raised curb, maybe that means if a curb that doesn't need paint, maybe we want to consider it because we've seen how people are using that street once it's installed. So we really need to balance kind of big picture, again, our risks, costs, and our maintenance needs. And so making sure that what we put out there can be maintained long-term is very important, especially when it comes to accessibility, because the time it takes to take out a barricade is a time where somebody could unexpectedly try to cross the street. But it has to be balanced also against the cost. So there's a continual kind of evaluation and evolution on these in each situation. So when we're doing projects, we want to consider impacts of pedestrian behavior and where they're located, how they're used, where they're located both in space in terms of our sidewalk zones, but also maybe how they're used, commercial zones versus a residential street. We also want to think about how long we need the pedestrian behavior changes to be kind of highlighted. So there may be short-term cones versus long-term closures. So in terms of our toolbox, this is kind of there's no kind of prioritization here, it's just a list, but we have standard warning raised curbs. This is unpainted, what we would put out there, contractor would put out there without any other notes. There's painted curbs. You can include color treatments such as decorative concrete, bollards, guardrails and barricades, and temporary cones to identify changes. So this might be where we want people to get familiar with it, but long-term, we don't think it needs ongoing maintenance of paint and kind of maintenance coverage. This is the approach we're taking for comment tonight, which is that, again, going back to pedestrian access routes versus changes to encroachments into pedestrian access routes. So using that as kind of a delineation. So outside of pedestrian access routes, this would be in landscape, non-traversable areas, traversable areas. Traversable areas may be a widening of a sidewalk in an area where there just isn't a planter strip, but the larger furniture zone delineates kind of an alignment of where the pedestrian access route would be. In those cases, you can see here, it ranges from maybe just a standard curb treatment to something that's more visible with colored concrete or potentially paint as we get into commercial and high pedestrian corridors. And then as we get into more impacts to our pedestrian access routes, where we have constrictions requiring vertical elements, that we look at using kind of bollards, signposts, street furnishings, it's another one that's often used. And again, considering increasing the amount of effort and visibility as we get into more commercial and high pedestrian corridors. And finally, the ones that's most challenging for pedestrian behavior is closures of crossings, because people want to cross where they want to cross, and changing behavior is complicated. In those cases, we probably want a much more significant barrier to make it very clear about crossings. So some of the recent raised curbs in City of Albany projects. We have Nielsen and Terrace. We had to rebuild a curb ramp due to a stormwater project. In that case, it's outside of the pedestrian access route, and we installed a raised curb fully outside because there was no way to build an ADA compliant crossing across the street. There is another crossing on the other side, and so that would serve. One of the key clarifications here, actually, I want to talk about is, which I did not include here, but is what a crossing is. So by vehicle code, a crossing is any extension of a pedestrian route on a block. And so even if there's no crosswalk, that is technically still considered a crossing unless we close it. On 8th Street, this is a bioretention basin installed on the Cornesis Creek Phase 4 trail project. This is a planter that was installed within the furniture zone, and it's serving well. People are following the pedestrian access route. It is narrow here, but clearly defined. And in Marin Masonic, you can see here, this bioretention basin was installed along the kind of consistent with the planter strip along Marin Avenue. Some more recent local examples of places where other situations that occur. This is in El Cerrito, Key and Barrett? No, not Barrett. I am not sure about the cross street, but this intersection used to have a crossing directly across the street. And during some project work, they had to close that crossing. And so in this case, they have a painted curb, barricade, because there's need for more kind of intensive behavior change in order to make sure that people are crossing at a safe location. This is along San Pablo Avenue in El Cerrito. This is at the El Cerrito del Norte Plaza. Around it is some of the development work and ongoing street work. So this is a change in the pedestrian access route. And theoretically, I don't think people were crossing here safely anyways, but you can see to the right that they are planning on putting in some kind of crossing on the very right-hand side. This is in construction, so what we're seeing here is likely not the final configuration. And in our case, if we were to follow kind of the proposed guidelines earlier, we would be painting and doing other kinds of colored concrete treatments. But this is an example of where we may want to stop people from crossing and change behavior along what would naturally be the crossing per vehicle code. With that, I open it up for questions and general comments about what I presented, any questions, and just general conversation.
Great, appreciate the presentation. Before we take questions, I do have a procedural question for staff as we are approaching 9:30. Going to need a motion to extend, and just wanted to find out of the remaining items, the San Pablo Pedestrian Improvement Project update, is that something we need to hear tonight, or can that one be deferred to July? And I know Jeff is here. I presume you won't be here in July, so we need to extend at least long enough to do 4-4. About 4-3.
Well, I'll defer to Allison, but this is essentially part of the same presentation, so it might make sense to continue on.
All right. So with that note, it sounds like we might need a slightly longer extension. Can I get a motion to extend the meeting?
I move we extend the meeting until 10 o'clock.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
No one opposed? Okay, thank you. All right, so with that, any questions on this item?
Yes.
The first intersection you showed in El Cerrito was Elm at Hill,
Oh, thank you very much.
across from the school. I didn't catch where the second intersection was.
That is on San Pablo Avenue, in 2 intersections north of Del Norte Plaza.
Near Del Norte. Great. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so I think, yes.
Yeah.
In your second presentation, are you getting into any other types of treatments? Or if I have comments about other treatments, would now be the appropriate time to bring that up?
I think now would be a great time to talk about other treatments and kind of talk generally about it, and followed by more specifics, then we can in the next presentation.
Okay, I'll hold that for.
Perfect. Okay, any public questions or comments? Have anyone online?
Any members of the public who are interested in speaking, raise your hand. Seeing none.
Okay, very good. Back to the commission for comments and discussion. Ken, it sounded like you had some, or does anyone else want to jump in? Go for it, Ken.
Right. So I gave some images to staff, and I think I want number 4. Is that doable? I'll start talking.
Just a point of clarification, it looks like number 2 and number 4 is a subset of number 2.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to. I thought number 4 was the combination, but whichever one's the combination of 2.
It's.
I was writing quickly.
It's in the not the direction we want it, and I wasn't able to play around before posting it, so it's just slanted on its side. I think I'll get us to number 2, and you can tell me if this is.
We'll go from there.
What you're looking for.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
While we're waiting for that to come up, I'll just jump in and make a couple quick comments. First off, really good description of all the elements and how we can use them. I think the integrated color can be a good way to contrast things if they're kind of outside the path of travel. Noting that there's a lot of places on Solano where we've got raised planters, and just the height of those make those into not a trip hazard because they're very conspicuous. So whether we use railings or just bring the concrete up to like a foot high, I think you're definitely talking about the right objectives, and just the methods of how we achieve it, maybe where we kind of nuance things so that they fit in context. So that was all I had.
Yep, and this is what I wanted, so that's great. So first of all, I want to note that in the pictures, the ones that were in Albany showed curved raised barriers facing pedestrian traffic, which is great. I noted that outside of Albany, that wasn't always true. So thank you. It's been an ongoing comment, and appreciate that that's being implemented. I agree that changing the color of the concrete is great, but it only goes so far. You have to be paying attention. And we had a letter from Brian Martin about this issue, and so he specifically was talking about coming to the intersection of Castro and San Pablo on the south leg facing San Pablo.
South leg, correct. And that, I think we'll be talking more specifically about that one in the next presentation if we want to go into details.
Right. So one of the things that I haven't heard talked about would be the treatment that is detectable warning surface, tactile warning delineator, which is separate from tactile directional indicators, which most of us have seen, like they have them at the BART station, El Cerrito Plaza. They're very low, they're dashed, and it's easy to walk over them, but they're also very easy to see. Tactile warning delineators, which, are you talking about those in the next item?
I am not. Tactile warning delineators right now are not covered by PROAG. They're not a kind of federally accepted method of delineating kind of warning areas. Again, this is kind of standards and guidelines, and the cities, as we heard earlier, their cities do have certain leeway to implement changes, but it is not something that is necessarily trained for people who are visually impaired in the States. I do know they are widely used internationally, though.
And they are referred to in the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide.
Yes.
So you're saying that NACTO isn't, recommendations aren't necessarily part of PROAG?
Correct, and they are, I think, my understanding is that nationally there is movement to try to incorporate a greater amount of types of detectable surfaces, but at this point they are not yet kind of standardized.
Okay. Is that true for both the furniture zone and the pedestrian access route?
I think installing them to delineate spaces is not something that we're saying cannot exist. They can be used, but if we're closing a crossing, that is not a recognized way of closing a crossing. Yeah.
Specifically, I was trying to look for ways to address the issue of narrowing of pathways, and also believe at the intersection of Portland and San Pablo, on the southeast corner, traveling along San Pablo, there are now some raised curbs.
There are.
To try and deal with the issues. And it's kind of a puzzle piece at the end of the sidewalk. And it seems like an angled tactile warning delineator strip could help guide people away from that puzzle piece area.
I think one of the things here is, are we talking about people who need visual assistance, or are we talking about pedestrians who don't need visual assistance? Because I think there is a difference in how people navigate, and if you're using a cane-detected kind of assistance, the curbs function. If you're not using a cane detection, something like that might be more beneficial. Again, the question is, if somebody's walking over it without a cane, is that going to provide feedback? This is not something I am necessarily, as somebody who doesn't use the cane. So I think that is a question that maybe we can talk to the Access Board, we can talk to the Orientation Center for the Blind. They are teaching people, and just get some feedback on that, if that's something we are looking to potentially incorporate in our guidelines, and kind of better understand the wide array of things that might be possible, but maybe not standardized.
There were a couple things that led me to this. One was Mr. Martin's comment about somebody who wasn't paying so much attention, who was able-bodied but was not aware that the sidewalk was narrowing. It seems like this sort of low-raised, brightly colored indicator would be tactile for people walking. And from my own standpoint, I always want people to be paying more attention to the intersection than the sidewalk when they get to an intersection.
We can maybe talk in the next one specifically about how we want to address that particular instance. Just to kind of add to it, it sounds like there were 3 people walking side by side where that narrowing happened. So there is the sidewalk there outside of the furnishing zones or the furniture zone is 5 feet wide, and it opens up at a driveway right before. But I think this is why we're going to have the next conversation out of this and maybe talk more specifically about what we want to do there.
Any other comments? Okay. Well, since this is just for providing comments to staff, let's move on to the next item, 4-3.
All right. I might, to make sure I'm doing this correctly. Do I? Apologies. Thank you again, and for your comments in the last item. And we'll kind of move into specifics on San Pablo pedestrian improvements, kind of a project update. So we're going to discuss tonight in this item the refinements that have been made, but we'll start with some project site-specific challenges, some proposed changes that we're looking at for Castro-San Pablo Avenue intersection, and kind of general refinements project-wide. As I discussed in the last item, so managing unmarked crossings is a particular challenge on San Pablo Avenue. And there's a few options. Generally, barricades, non-traversable area. This is either a detectable curb that's 4-inch minimum height by ADA, 6-inch by California Building Code, and a landscape area. Well, sorry, I'm going to take back the California Building Code. That is for a fall hazard, which is not the case here. And then a landscape area, which has to be 24-inch wide minimum. We also have some wide sweeping curb ramps here. So there's a need to protect pedestrians in it and reduce accidental vehicle strikes to poles and utilities. One of the ideas that is proposed under an upcoming Alameda, or is being evaluated under an upcoming Alameda CTC project that is coordinating with Caltrans, is whether bollards may be proposed. And so some comments about that would also be appreciated, because we will be also communicating with them. There's another challenge, which is some very steep slopes at the garage with some warping, sidewalk warping, which often leads to rolled ankles and other kinds of pedestrian injuries. We needed to change pedestrian behavior at Brighton Avenue. This is the old crosswalk on the left, and we have relocated the crossing to the north side of the intersection. The building interests, we kind of briefly touched on this in the last presentation. One thing to note is while the raised curb with the railing is within the larger pedestrian access route down the corridor, the raised curb on the street side is within the kind of larger furniture zone area and is consistent with the alignment of kind of non-pedestrian route throughout this block. Another challenge we have, which is often less discussed, although has come up quite a bit on this project and Washington Avenue, is the fact that we have no storm drain on this corridor, and Washington, Portland, San Pablo are all three of them are major overland flow channels. We have issues with landscaping washing out throughout town where large amounts of waters are flowing, and San Pablo Avenue specifically has a lot of debris that catches in planting areas and other things that lead to significant amounts of maintenance, and also, luckily, a lot of community support for cleaning up San Pablo. I see the Blue Glove group out almost every day when I'm out there. So long-term, on the storm drain front, curb ramps really cannot be expected to control this amount of flow, and we'd need a storm drain system in order to make this no longer be the kind of challenge that we're discussing tonight. Other challenges. This is Castro. This was actually coincidentally 2 days ago where we lost our first barricade. This is an area where this ramp was pulled out before, or was constructed before we identified kind of the need to close pedestrian crossings on the project. And so we put up a barricade to meet the minimum that we needed to do. But as you can see, within 8 months of installation, we've already lost it. Other challenges are inconsistent furniture zones on blocks. San Pablo Avenue was developed in much more piecemeal fashion than other parts of Albany. It's a much older street. Significant utility conflicts at corners, which mean that in some cases we were unable to relocate utility boxes. And although coordination across multiple projects. And there's 3 different projects on San Pablo Avenue in the same kind of corridor area at the same time in 2004. We needed to close the project out. At this point, we are looking at kind of some refinements before we close. We needed to close the contract out, but we are looking at refinements before we close the CIP project to make sure that the final resolution is something we're all happy with. With that being said, some of the refinements, just kind of briefly, and then I'll talk about each one individually. We are looking at lowering the northwest Castro corner. So this is the corner with the barricade that was just damaged. We're looking at improvements to closing the North Lake crossing. That's where the barricade was damaged. And we're looking at adding concrete valley gutters. They were included in projects in other locations, but not at this particular location. Generally, we're looking at painting all of the raised curbs. This is a commercial corridor, and as discussed, we have a lot of pedestrian. We're trimming back or adding barricades on curbs, which extend into the pedestrian access route. Repair minor damages that have occurred on the new project work, and improve visibility of pedestrian safety islands. These islands are getting run over quite a bit, and we've lost a lot of our traffic signage there. So we want things that are a little bit more durable, can take a few hits. So starting with the first one, this is identified, we've had some issues here during construction that needed to get resolved. And even with the improved kind of intersection, we are still having some issues with being able to get the transitions between our ADA path of travel, valley gutter, and hillside. This picture gives, this hillside is a little steeper than what it looks like in this photo. Both down from Castro and the approaches on the north and south sidewalk area. So lowering the curb ramp is expected to allow us to kind of improve the kind of valley gutter to curb ramp crossing or crosswalk transition for a smoother kind of vehicle turn. We're seeing a lot of damage to the existing pavement at that location from cars bottoming out, scraping, other things like that. We want to close the North Lake crossing formally. So this is showing where that pedestrian access route would be even with the barricades. Pushed as far in as I could comfortably put in, hoping that nobody would run it over. Got run over, and it does not cover the pedestrian access route at all. And we want to paint all raised curbs white, contrast with what's out there with the stamped red concrete. Specifically for the Castro San Pablo final adjustments at the raised curbs, where there was a report of somebody tripping, that is a location where we extended it a little too far. It was not aligned with the pedestrian access route in the back, and so we do want to trim that back. When the trip happened, this is a photo from that report from Brian Martin, As you can see, the curb was not painted white. It has since been painted white. I think there's significant more visibility here now. But comments tonight if there's recommendations from this commission or comments from this commission about increasing the visibility, we are happy to hear and look at ways to incorporate. And finally, metal barricades at the southeast corner of, I'm sorry, this is not Castro and San Pablo, this is Brighton and San Pablo. This is where we had the crossing closure. This is a location where we are still seeing pedestrian behavior where they step over and try to cross even now. And so we really want to make sure this is fully closed with a barricade and a sign saying to direct pedestrians to the north leg of the intersection. Finally, these are more kind of avoiding major ongoing maintenance issues. This is what that corner currently looks like. You can see there used to be some signage at the very corner. People have run over it multiple times. We lose cones. Clearly, pedestrian improvements are needed, but we also want to make that corner a little bit clearer. The crossing, protected crossing, a little clearer, so that vehicles don't continue to run over it. So, with that, questions and comments.
Any questions from the commission? No questions? Any public questions or comments?
Sorry, I do have a question. This might be totally like infeasible, so I guess that's what I'm asking about. Similar to Masonic and Marin with the bioretention basin there being like a kind of landscaped permanent barrier, is anything like that feasible in the intersections that you're wanting to put a more like permanent barrier?
So I think under this project or this capital improvement project, likely no. We're trying to still work within our remaining project contingency in delivering any kind of refinements. However, we have claimed the space, so to say, in a little way, potentially. I will say that these are very narrow, even still. And bioretention basins, especially in Albany and some of the flatter areas, need storm drainage to underdrain to make sure there's not kind of vector control issues. So it may be a future kind of thing versus a now thing.
Thank you.
Okay. Any public questions or comments? Anyone online?
Any members of the public who wish to speak, raise your hand, please. Seeing none.
Okay, back to the commission for any additional comments to staff.
Why don't I go first?
Please do.
Thank you. By the way, I think I was mistaken. The corner I think I was thinking of as more of a puzzle piece is at Washington and San Pablo on the southeast corner. But it didn't look as bad as I remembered in the picture, so I'll have to go look again.
Sure.
Sorry I didn't have time to do that before this meeting. Even in your pictures, the painted raised curbs are so much more visible.
Yeah.
At that Castro corner, can we also paint the retaining curb?
Yes. That
Because
seems.
that's in the PAR. And
Yeah.
you know the long-term stated preference from this commission is to avoid retaining curbs in the PAR.
Yeah.
But in this case, it was needed, so painting it would be helpful.
Yeah, that seems very reasonable.
So it looks like you're on a good track to reduce the raised curbing at that particular point, east-west, to get to the desire line, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is great. So that would seem to clear up a lot of the issue there. And thank you for taking all of these issues into consideration, even though they require changes to something you've just done. And it's a learning process for all of us, right?
Yeah, and I will say, as a large project, a lot of these are considered minor changes. This is part of kind of closing out of a project, is identifying these and addressing them. And the reason we didn't just move ahead with it was primarily because we needed to start kind of looking at the larger picture at Castro and San Pablo Avenue, which required kind of more investigation and understanding.
So on the northwest corner of Castro and San Pablo, will you end up bulbing out a bit into Castro to try and move the barrier into the desired line?
That would require Caltrans kind of coordination. What we're looking at is, unfortunately, and again, I do not personally like building raised curbs everywhere because of expressed concerns. Likely another raised curb there is the way to have kind of ongoing longevity to any barricade. I think as we see behavior, if there's need to add barriers on top of that, it's something that we can look at as kind of an operational change versus a project-specific change. But really primarily focusing on where known pedestrian behavior needs to change. Say on Brighton is, I think, the primary focus and the kind of priority here.
Great. Signs don't change all behavior.
They do not.
But was there a sign on that barricade, or was it a decision not to put a sign on the barricade?
There was not a decision not to put signs on the barricade. There was a decision that we needed to close the contract.
Would you consider adding a sign as a reinforcement to the next
absolutely.
barricade?
Absolutely. Any barricades we put up should have signs on them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
Great. Any other comments? Okay. I will make just a very quick comment because I don't think this is a retrofit for this location and might not be feasible in the first place. But when I run into really funky ramp issues, I start to think about, can I just do a raised crosswalk and do away with the ramps entirely? It's just thinking in other dimensions. This is a really horrible drainage location, so again, probably not feasible.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate all the attention you're giving to this. So we got about 7 minutes left, and maybe we're going to need another extension.
Let's see.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
So moving on to 4-4, this is a proclamation honoring the dedicated service of Jeff Bond in recognition of his 19 years of exemplary leadership and commitment to the City of Albany. So we'll deliver a proclamation. And Justin, are you going to lead this?
I can read the proclamation that was drafted if you'd like.
I would be very happy if you would like to read the proclamation, Ken.
I would like to read the proclamation.
And then we can all make comments and extend as needed.
I'm going to stay seated and thank Director Bond for staying this evening in his last week, I believe.
Not quite, but July 15th will be my last day. Thank you.
Okay. Feel free to sit if you prefer.
Be comfortable, please.
So this is a resolution of appreciation to Jeff Bond for his service to transportation initiatives in the City of Albany. Whereas Jeff Bond has served the City of Albany for over 19 years and as Community Development Director for over 10 years. And under Bond's leadership, the Community Development Department has been the primary support to the Transportation Commission and its role in public engagement for transportation-related projects. And, sorry, I overscrolled. Director Bond has shared a wealth of experience along with practical and procedural acumen with the Transportation Commission at numerous meetings. And Bond, Jeff Bond, has always shown exemplary skill in negotiation and management of projects that involve the University of California, including the Buchanan and Jackson pathways. And Director Bond shepherded the UC development project along San Pablo Avenue for many years with a calm demeanor and a cool head through protests, lawsuits, and voluminous public comment, sometimes late into the night. And Director Bond's work is seen in numerous built projects around town and will be for many years in those that are currently in development. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Transportation Commission does express its appreciation to Jeff Bond for his long service to the City of Albany and wishes him the best in future endeavors. Thank you.
I will keep you to your 10 o'clock deadline. I just want to thank you for that. That's lovely and unexpected. You know, it's the accomplishments that have happened over the last 19 years have been a collaboration of a lot of different people. Commissioners, for sure, you have a tough job of navigating and mediating and distilling complicated issues, controversial issues in your community where your friends and neighbors have different opinions, and that's very uncomfortable. I find that personally uncomfortable in my own neighborhood where there are issues going on, and like, I don't know if I want to get in the middle of this. But good for you, for many of you, for I think all my years have been in one role or another with the city, so thank you for that. My colleagues also are I think about, again, some of the projects that you're referring to. Most of the creative work were these people and our consultants sometimes that have been here earlier this evening as an example. And my job is just to kind of keep them going and get them paid and
support them.
Support them. Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
Which you've done admirably.
So, going into this this evening and the last few weeks, those are the kind of things that I'm reflecting a lot about. So, and then finally, some of the projects that you mentioned that will, I find myself, again, a little reflective these days that some of the things we're working on are things that the city manager, the community development director, when I started, were working on. So you're right, 19 years from now, whoever will be in this position will be going like, well, who's this Jeff Bond guy? But they'll be working on some of these things. The active transportation plan that you worked on this evening as an example, I'm sure will be part of that. So again, thank you very much for the proclamation. It's been a real honor to work for this community and work for this commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I do want to make a couple of quick comments here because I was on council when you started. I remember the excitement from everyone that, oh, wow, we've got Jeff Bond joining the city. This is going to be great. He's got all the skill connections that you see. And you have far exceeded anything that excitement had portended. So you've been an amazing professional through very challenging things at times. And I'm just incredibly impressed. Your team, everyone that has worked with you, I feel you facilitated a very good team atmosphere and people just doing a tremendous amount. And it's ironic and yet fitting that once again, here you are at a meeting that's run late for, I don't know how many countless times that has happened. We didn't even finish public comment till almost 1 o'clock on the UC Village project. So thankfully it's not that late, but I could never say thank you enough for the great things you've done and how good you make everyone around you look, including me. So personal thanks. It's been great. Now we've hit 10 o'clock. So thank you, Jeff. All right. We can't take any further actions, but if you want to make any last announcements before we officially adjourn, or do we want to extend for like 3 minutes? I'll move we extend for 3 minutes.
Second.
Yes.
Proceed.
Thank you. Only announcements I had was we noted in the announcements, street tree management plan draft is available for review and will be going to council this coming month. We expect the CIP to go to council at the next meeting as well. And just advance notice, AC Transit service changes, implementing the realigned bus network project that this body has reviewed as it was developed, should be taking effect August 10th. So coming up soon.
Excellent. With that, yes.
There's no future agenda items on the note on the, or item on the agenda.
Correct. We will.
During the announcements time is also your time to request future.
Oh, I see, right there. I
Yeah.
see it now. Thank you. Read it too fast. Could you do my picture number 1? Should be a logo. We had a letter from Estrella Sainberg about the phasing of the signal and the dangers to pedestrians who go out on the walk signal at Masonic and the Greenway. I'm sorry, Marin and the Greenway.
Yes.
And I'd like to see that on a future agenda.
Certainly, we can talk about that. I've got some ideas.
And then it's long been a goal of mine to avoid talking about the middle of Solano as Upper Solano. And recently, the Solano Avenue Association has branded the Berkeley portion of Solano as Upper Solano, and along with the Berkeley Improvement District, essentially, is the leading actor there. So I would like to call an agenda item to discuss recommending to the City Council that we change how we refer to those sections of Solano.
Okay. We will consider that for a future agenda. All right. Any last announcements? Seeing none, we are adjourned, and our next meeting is Thursday, July 24th. Thank you all.